What if Bela discovered magic at Hogwarts? Part 2. Bela, said Jasper. I could barely hear him as my sobs became desperate gasps for oxygen. The grief was like a disease. It weakened my muscles and constricted my airways, making movement or breathing impossible. I felt my strength evaporating and the pressure upon my lungs increase as I continued to hyperventilate. In the next instant, a surge of calm rippled through my veins, allowing the air to begin seeping back into my aching lungs, and the trembling spasms, which had plagued my body ever since Edward had lowered me to the floor, to stop suddenly. You need to listen, continued Jasper, his wintry thumbs sweeping up to my temples and performing similar soothing motions to those that Edward had used moments before. His velvety voice remained firm, but it was also, somehow, gentle in the same moment. You are in the middle of a battle, Bela. People die in battles, and people get hurt. I understand how hard it is, I truly do, but sitting here, grieving, is not helping anyone. Jasper had never allowed himself to be in such close proximity with me before now. I understood why he had had to keep his distance. What I didn't understand was how he had suddenly attained the impossible control he had been lacking for so long. Warm, fresh blood, after all, was still trickling from my newly acquired wound. Some of it had dried into my hair, but the wetness hadn't completely vanished. Jasper's mouth was now undoubtedly swimming with venom, but he never faltered as he continued to stare directly into my tear-filled eyes. The time for that will come later. Now, you have to do as Edward has said. You have to focus, and remember that they are the reason behind Fred's death. And then the calm and soothing ripple was replaced by something else, something hot and intense that seemed to burn in my blood as it pumped through my chest and limbs. My hands balled into fists as the surge reached them, and my jaw clenched as it moved upwards towards my brain. I didn't need Jasper to tell me that he was manipulating my emotions, filling me with anger and hate for those that had killed Fred. I didn't protest. It actually felt good, and was a welcome distraction from the pain. Jas, Edward warned, tasting my mood via his brother's ability. Jasper didn't reply, not verbally, anyway, and refused to avert his penetrating stare. Then, when he was finally satisfied with the rage he had helped to nourish, he sinuously rose to his feet and offered me his hand. I took it, and he effortlessly pulled me up. Your wand, said Edward, holding out my weapon for me to grasp. You dropped it when you fell. I took it silently, before looking into his face. I knew my own did not reflect my mood. I had a fairly good idea of what I would have seen if I'd peered into a mirror. There would have been no life in my eyes. They'd be completely and utterly dead, like Fred's. The sight was obviously distressing to Edward. He had never seen me like this before. Let us go, I said simply, walking towards the door of the deserted classroom. The others followed me, and then we were running off into the thick of it once again. We ran past Percy, who was furiously battling a Death Eater. I recognized the cloaked figure as Rookwood, and trusted that Fred's death would have provided his brother with enough focus and determination that he'd be able to handle Voldemort's servant without assistance. We should find the others, Alice suggested, to which we all agreed. We exited onto the grand staircase and began our descent. Jasper led us, and we darted down the levels and back through the corridors. We had just rounded a corner when I caught sight of a lone Death Eater. He had been running in our direction, but changed course upon seeing us, evidently aware that the chances of survival when facing a witch and 3 vampires were virtually non-existent. The rage burning in my chest exploded through my body, consuming every fiber of tissue and demanding some form of payment. I shot a shield from my wand and projected it through the air. The Death Eater crashed headfirst into the barrier, which had expanded to block him. The Cullens slowed, which was when I took my chance. I launched myself forwards and repeated the spell, causing a shield to erupt between us. Edward's reaction was immediate. He threw himself against the obstruction and began pummeling it with every ounce of his strength. No, Bela, don't you dare, don't you dare. Jasper and Alice were attacking the shield with the same desperate movements. I turned my back on all of them, and went to face the hooded man. His head tilted to the side as he regarded me. Now that the odds were a little fairer, he showed no signs of worry whatsoever. After what seemed like hours, he finally addressed me. You stupid child, you really think you stand a chance against me? You have caged yourself in with death. And then a curse was hurtling towards me. The anger was helpful, it seemed to make my senses more acute. I barely had to think as I propelled another shield forwards. The killing curse reflected backwards and exploded against the castle wall. Expulso! I screamed, aiming my wand at the ceiling above the Death Eater. He jumped just in time, and flew against the floor as the stone came crashing down behind him. I gave him no opportunity to retaliate, and threw a string of fire in his direction. He countered it with a jet of water, our spells colliding in a blast of steam. The steam dispersed into a shroud of thick mist, making it difficult to perceive my opponent. I didn't see them until they were about 3 meters away, but suddenly 100 daggers were heading straight for me. I flourished my wand, and was no longer in danger of being pierced by any of the silver blades. Instead I was being bombarded by an army of tiny, shimmering bubbles. Once the vapor cleared, I saw that a handful of students had gathered on the other side of the shield nearest the Death Eater. I recognized the faces of Seamus Finnegan, Dean Thomas, and Lavender Brown. I retaliated against my opponent with the same move he had directed at me, and watched as my soaring daggers were transfigured into fluffy, white feathers. They floated around the Death Eater, some settling on his hood and robes. I smiled wickedly and flicked my wand, watching as the feathers instantly burst into flames. They rained down and lovingly caressed his shadowy garments, as if attracted to the billowing, black fabric. And, then, the man let out a horrific, prolonged scream, thrashing under the attack of the licentious flames. His hood fell backwards in his panic, leaving his hair unprotected against the falling fire. It ignited quickly, and he dropped to the ground as a result, rolling frantically in his attempts to banish the pain. He flashed his wand and the fire around him extinguished, before he jumped back up to his feet. The Death Eater was about to throw another curse in my direction, but I was ready for it. I had already filled my thoughts with the image of Fred's dead smile, and that was all I needed to ensure my triumph against the disgusting enemy. My mind flew back to memories of 6th year, and the whispered rumors of the spell which had almost resulted in the death of a student. Sectum Sempra, I screamed, firing the spell forwards. I had been aiming for the man's chest, but he threw himself out of the way. An intense cry reached me, however, as he collided with the stone floor, and as my eyes traveled across his body, I realized that I hadn't missed, after all. Off to the side laid one of his hands. It had been severed completely, leaving him with nothing more than a crimson stump, rapidly leaking blood. I was about to lift my wand and finish the job, but a voice from behind broke my concentration, and I stopped. "Please, Bela," the desperate voice pleaded. "Please, Don T." I brought my wand a fraction higher in preparation. "Please," he begged. "Don T, allow yourself to become like them." I faltered, and then anger overwhelmed me. How could he deny me my chance to avenge my dead friend? How dare he? How could he ask me to let this pathetic excuse for a human being live? The man deserved to die, and I deserved the satisfaction of killing him. The last enraged thought provoked some spark of doubt, though some wriggling worm that weakened my resolve and left me at the edge of an incredible precipice. I knew in that moment that the next spell I performed would have the power to either reinforce the person that I was, my morals, my values, and my sense of self, or change me irrevocably. I could feel the people on either side of the lines holding their breath as I pointed my wand at the wailing Death Eater. Mine held too as the conflict raged within me. I could feel the tears welling as the scales tipped. Finally, however, I made my decision. Expelliarmus. In the next second, the shields disappeared and I felt myself being swung against a wall, though 2 hands were pressed against my head and back to protect me from the impact. Edward's face was a mixture of fury, relief, and awe. His lips were pulled back over his teeth slightly and his forehead touched mine. When he spoke, his voice was trembling and his breathing erratic. "Don T, you ever dare do that to me again? Do you hear me? Don T, you ever?" And I knew that I never would. I had had one of my very best friends ripped from me within the space of a second. An experience that traumatic could very easily shape an individual for life. It certainly wouldn't have been a difficult thing to allow myself to become a murderer. If faced with the task of killing someone to protect my loved ones, I knew the decision I would make each and every time. But killing for personal satisfaction was a quality belonging to Voldemort, and certainly not one I wanted to adopt. And it was Edward that had pulled me back. It was him who always brought out the best in me, feeding every positive thought and emotion. I could fully admit now that there was surely no other reason why my Patronus was a lion. Suddenly his lips were on mine and he was kissing me hungrily, as if his life depended on it, and despite the fact that we were stood in the middle of a crumbling castle, the threat of death lurking around the nearest corner, I could find absolutely no reason to complain. "Ought to you positioned that on keep for a while," Alice stated lightly, even though the words meditated her inflammation. "We re inside the center of a war, don't forget." Edward and I reluctantly ended our kiss, entangling our limbs, all of which had some way controlled to snake around the frame of the other to shape a weird arrangement, pulling us so tightly together that we had probably resembled a novel faceless creature. I seemed down the hall to in which the Death Eater becomes still laid. Seamus Finnegan, Dean Thomas, and Lavender Brown were all soaring over him. The severity of his condition had rendered him subconscious. His stump become bleeding profusely, and if he didn't receive a few interest straight away, it wouldn't be counted that I hadn't resorted to the worst unforgivable curse. I used to be about to approach, only a distraction appeared within the shape of McGonagall. She become wielding her wand and sending a herd of desks charging along in advance of her. She stopped upon seeing the bleeding guy, and so too did her wooden troops. "Which one of you did this?" she wondered, her eyes zeroing in at the loss of Life Eater's severed hand. "I did," I admitted, stepping round Edward to stand my vintage Transfiguration trainer. "I am sorry, Professor. I used to be just so irritated after Fred." She held up a finger to stop me. "Please, Dante bounced to the wrong conclusion. Leave out Swan," she stated unexpectedly, her face softening slightly. "I was simply questioning who need to claim his wand." "I am sorry. His wand, leave out Swan. You have defeated its grasp in combat and, consequently, its allegiance could have modified. Wands respond to power, and the triumphant. In case you pick out to say it which might be really useful in mild of our modern day state of affairs, I have no doubt that it'll completely obey your every command. Now," she stated, turning her interest lower back to the Death Eater, whose pores and skin was swiftly nearing a color of white to rival the Cullens we have to see to this one. "We can rarely leave him here to stain the halls of Hogwarts." She pointed to one of the desks and shouted, "You, there, take this guy to Madame Pomfrey. She is presently within the grand corridor attending the injured." The table galloped in the direction of the loss of Life Eater, who with a flick of McGonagall's wand floated onto it, as did his indifferent hand. She bound his body in tight ropes, before sending the table returned in the direction she had come from. She flicked her wand once more, and the mahogany stick on the floor flew into my open hand. I closed my palms across the timber and at once felt a surge of heat air flow into my frame. "Appropriate luck, you four," she finished, indicating myself and the Cullens, earlier than turning her interest returned to her unit. "Agency 2, resume fee." And rancid they went, flying down the hall toward the primary front, the opposite Gryffindors jogging closely behind them. I decided to test my new wand, aiming it on the puddle of blood left over from the duel. It disappeared in an immediate, and from the corner of my eye, I noticed Jasper's stiff posture relax infinitesimally. "Edward," I murmured, all at once remembering Voldemort's last Horcrux and the project we wanted to finish, "what approximately Harry? Wherein is he?" "He's on his way down the name of the game passage main to the Shrieking Shack. He has the invisibility cloak. Should not we pass assist him? If we are going to get to Nagini. I do not assume there is tons hazard of that, in the intervening time," he responded. "Voldemort is maintaining his puppy near now that he is aware of what Harry is doing. Don't worry, Bella, Harry is not intending on doing something reckless. He has Ron and Hermione with him, and he's no longer going to danger them getting hurt not after." My belly clenched as he trailed off. "We must get back to the others," Jasper cut in. "We are able to do extra precise in the meantime if we work collectively to protect the scholars." Before we prompt again, Edward scooped me up and placed my legs round his waist, our chests pressed tightly together in order that I was searching over his shoulder. He glaringly wasn't going to permit me another possibility to give a repeat overall performance of my mild show with the Death Eater, but the reality that I now had wands to wield intended that carrying me on his lower back might be impossible. I'd have insisted on the use of only one till my feet were firmly returned on strong floor, however I knew I'd be able to do greater correct with, besides, having my legs wrapped around Edward this manner was a much more thrilling role. "Really no longer the time, Bella," Jasper shouted, recommencing the dash. Edward chuckled silently and my face flooded with warmness. I vented my frustration at the severe enemies we surpassed, correctly tossing lovely spells and body-binding curses this manner and that. At one factor, we flew at a group of Loss of Life Eater-s approximately to complete off Ravenclaw College students. Alice and Jasper smashed into them, and that they fell like bowling pins, at once rendered subconscious by using the intensity of the collision. One had avoided the hit, however, and raised his wand inside the air, approximately to carry it down upon the scholars. I yelled my spell and pointed my wand at stained shards scattered underneath the now glassless windows, looking as they flew 1,000 lethal projectiles toward the Death Eater. He heard me shout and grew to become to protect himself, reworking the glass into flying daisies. Although I didn't hit the man, the distraction turned into sufficient to help the pupils. They both concurrently raised their wands because the dying eater turned his lower back on them and cried out stupefy, causing their enemy to crash towards the closest wall. Then I felt my frame spin and heard, "Duck." I pressed my head into Edward's chest and clutched my fingers to his shirt. Through the slits of my eyes, I noticed that the return of his head turned into enveloped in a halo of inexperienced light, and in the subsequent second, 2 massive primitive roars echoed through the corridor. Then the whole lot spun once more in a dizzying flash of coloration, and we were capturing returned closer to the clock tower, leaving at the back of 3 cloaked figures crumpled at the ground. Ultimately, we reached the others. They had been situated half of way down the corridor, and have been joined via Luna and Ernie Macmillan. "You have been lacking all of the fun," Emmett shouted, hearing our method. He had his high-quality, bulky palms wrapped around a bushy acromantula. Certainly the vampires had finished a very good process, for there had been very few now heading toward us. "I was positive you would have had those all sorted by now," Alice said, extraordinarily peeved at her loss of imaginative and prescient. "It is now not my fault," her brother answered. "Apparently, these things get their freak on each goddamn day." With the return of Edward, Jasper, and Alice, the Cullens had the relaxation of the arachnids out of the image inside much less than a minute, leaving the corridor empty of foes. I was about to ask the others what they idea we ought to do next, but Edward released a snarl and moved right into a searching position. "What is the matter?" asked Ernie. "More are on their way." "You've gotta be kidding me," I yelled, very well pissed. "What number of may want to their po?" "Now not spiders," he shouted. "Wizards." And then lightning burst toward us, the vampires forming a good shield in response. "Intention for their legs," a voice cried, and I straight away noticed something low streaking toward us. Rosalie jumped forwards, breaking rank, and swung her foot backwards as though making ready to kick a soccer. She brought it down and there was a mighty crack, before the light shot backwards within the contrary course, crashing into the ceiling and inflicting a part of it to collapse. At the least 3 of the Demise Eaters were beaten under the rubble, not one among them emerging in the ensuing seconds. The explosion forced a hurry of dusty air in our direction. As quickly because it touched my face, I heard Edward and Jasper growl. "Placed up your defend, Bela. Do it now." Edward, known as Wah, they werewolves. This failed to give an explanation for why I was unexpectedly being requested to cut myself off from the combat. "Werewolves we are absolutely allowed to hurt," Emmett defined. I projected a guard outwards, watching because it improved to fill the hall. Angelina and Wood did the equal, so that there were now 3 status between both us and the Cullens, giving us triple safety. Sooner or later, Emmett laughed, charging off towards the robed figures. Katie shook her head. "I do not understand." Carlyle, Esme, Rosalie and Alice were each carrying centered expressions. The 3 boys, however, appeared like a bunch of kids that had just been given loose rein in Honeydukes. Jasper and Edward were sneering in pleasure, even as Emmett cackled manically. "They've been ready some time for this," I said. My comment didn't specifically enlighten any of my buddies. The complete fight lasted little greater than 3 minutes. In that point, I witnessed a gruesome scene. The doomed guys pointed their wands in panic time and again, achieving no outcomes because the light bounced of the bodies of the vampires, all of whom moved fluidly as they beaten and battered our enemy, every being careful to spill as little blood as possible. Finally, the remaining one fell, his face red after having Jasper's cold strong hands wrapped round his throat. From in which I stood, I ought to honestly see the finger-fashioned bruises left in the back of The Cullens headed returned in our direction as we lowered our shields. I think I subsequently apprehend why the Raxperts hold a secure distance, Luna smiled dreamily. I may additionally undertake a own family of vampires too, Bela. Emmett shook with laughter. He had clearly taken an awesome liking to Luna. Edward cocked his head and looked at her, an exceptionally confused expression plastered across his face. I suspected that he was trying to make sense of her mind, and glaringly having no success. Now what? Requested Katie, glancing up and down the corridor. Perhaps we ought to go be part of the others, Ernie stated, surely a little uncomfortable with the concept of being within the vicinity of 7 deadly vampires, especially after coming across their skills firsthand. That might leave this entrance completely exposed, Timber contradicted. I suppose we ought to separate. It doesn't want anyone to defend the region. We have to help Harry, I whispered at a stage that neither I, nor the alternative people, may want to pay attention. I knew the Cullens would discover the sound effortlessly. He might not be capable of reach the Horcrux without assists. You've got fought, said a excessive, cold voice, the sound reverberating via the air, instilling instant fear and annoying my attention, valiantly. Lord Voldemort is aware of a way to cost bravery. Yet you've got sustained heavy losses. In case you keep to withstand me, you will all die, one by one. I do no longer want this to manifest. Each drop of magical blood spilled is a loss and a waste. Lord Voldemort is merciful. I command my forces to retreat, immediately. You have 1 hour. Dispose of your lifeless with dignity. Treat your injured. I communicate now, Harry Potter, without delay to you. All people tensed, even extra so. You have accepted your pals to die for you as opposed to face me yourself. I shall watch for 1 hour in the Forbidden Forest. If, on the end of that hour, you have not come to me, have now not given yourself up, then battle recommences. This time, I shall input the fray myself, Harry Potter, and I shall locate you, and I shall punish every closing guy, girl and baby who has attempted to conceal you from me. 1 hour. The speech ended, but our organization remained silent. Slowly however clearly, the faces of the vampires have become feral and terrifying, their lips, pulling again to reveal lethal, glistening tooth, making them seem all the more frightening. In the end, Esme growled. Natural evil. The devil incarnate. The rest of us nodded in response. We have to cross and discover the others, stated Timber. They will need assist, with the bodies. After which we left for the exquisite corridor, scared of what we'd see when we arrived there. The human beings walked out in front, myself and the Cullens trailing carefully in the back of. I need you to keep an eye on Harry, I stated to Edward. If I've learned anything of his individual within the ultimate 7 years, it is that he tends to play the hero. He's not continually had a choice in the be counted, but it's in his nature to behave bravely, every so often to the factor of stupidity. Edward raised an eyebrow at my words. I failed to realize what to make of his expression. Something it supposed, he didn't explain. As a substitute, he answered to my request. I have been maintaining tabs on him ever considering the fact that we separated. I can guarantee you of that. Are there any new trends? Jasper inquired. Absolutely, there are. He stopped inside the middle of the corridor, waiting until the ones in advance of us had rounded the subsequent corner and were out of earshot. Then, he turned the full pressure of his eyes on me. Snape is useless. What? I gasped. Voldemort killed him. Now it turned into the others flipped to splutter disbelievingly. But that makes no sense. Carlyle blurted. Snape become his ally, wasn't he? Edward took a second, seeming to assume his answer through. That is all very tough to give an explanation for, he endured, due to the fact I don't clearly understand it myself. Voldemort killed Snape for a wand. He already has a wand, I said, thoroughly baffled via this point. Yes, he does, but he desired one that was more effective, one that is as legend says unbeatable. I felt my brow furrow with suspicion. Are you speaking approximately the loss of life stick? Demise stick, echoed Rosalie. Professor Binns mentioned it in History of Magic a few instances. He said that the wand left a bloody path via history, and that people have been frequently killed in the course of their sleep after they were rumored to possess it. However, it was just a delusion. It is now not actual. I suppose it is, Edward argued, the crease returning to the space among his eyes. As I was watching the scene within the shrieking shack, Voldemort advised Snape that when both his wand and his servant S did not kill Harry, he sought an extra powerful wand. He applied some names while discussing it, considered one of which was the one you simply cited, Bela. But it isn't always actual. It is, Edward insisted. It is real. After he found that he could not defeat Harry, no matter which wand he took, he started seeking out the only that became stated to be unbeatable. And he discovered it. He located it, Bela, as it became right here watching for him. I don't apprehend, I admitted. Before he died, Dumbledore changed into the grasp of the unbeatable wand. It turned into mendacity in his grave with him the whole time. And Voldemort took it, looking forward to it to paintings for him. Then he took my hand in which I clutched the mahogany wand, and held it up for everyone to see. Do not you recognize, Bela? Do not you recollect what your Professor told? Wands respond to electricity, to the successful, I whispered. All of the little portions had been starting to in-shape collectively. Edward nodded. Which means that the authentic master of the unbeatable wand turned into the identical guy who killed Dumbledore. Snape, murmured Jasper, his eyes glassy as he taken into consideration the implications of Edward's revelation. Edward nodded again. What can we do? Rosalie asked frantically. If he now has an unbeatable wand, on top of the final Horcrux, how can we kill him? If what you are pronouncing is authentic, he is as indestructible as we are now. I do not suppose so, Edward introduced, his head shaking quick backward and forward. The only issue tying him to lifestyles now could be the Horcrux. His wand may be the most effective one in life, however that applies specifically to wand fight. What are you trying to get at, Edward? Carlyle asked. What I am attempting to mention, he emphasized, is the fact that we are nevertheless vampires, and irrespective of how super the unbeatable wand performs towards wizards, our pores and skin will likely nonetheless mirror its assaults. What is the plan? Alice demanded without delay, seeming to understand where Edward become going with this. I say we pass again to the exquisite corridor and wait until the hour is up. He said he'd be coming into the fortress to combat. Whilst that occurs, he is going to not be able to depend on safety from his dying eaters. They may have their very own lives to worry approximately. When Voldemort enters the warfare, I say the seven folks take the wand through pressure, after which cross after the snake. If no different wand Voldemort uses has the strength to defeat Harry S., then optimistically the loss of the demise stick and the very last Horcrux will provide Harry the shot he desires. Edward's plan changed into not anything brief of insane. It horrified me that he changed into even thinking about it. My heart commenced pumping so quickly that I was without a doubt in threat of cardiac arrest. I anticipated the others to protest and inform Edward he become a lunatic, however they did not, leaving me terrified as I noticed settlement and resolution flash via 7 pairs of sparkling golden eyes. You cannot be serious, I shouted, my eyes extensive as I stared on the vampires in disbelief. Have you lost your minds? You speaking approximately taking over the darkest and most risky wizard of all time. This is certainly insane. I've by no means heard whatever so ridiculous. You said it yourself, Bela, Alice stated dismissively. Our pores and skin is impenetrable to magical assault. With ordinary wands. If Voldemort actually does have the demise stick, how do you recognize that it might not be powerful enough to hurt you, too? We do not, Edward replied, refusing to accept my protests, but who else is there on the way to be robust sufficient or rapid enough to take it from him? He may be powerful, Bela, however he is nonetheless just one guy. Even though he is immortal till his Horcrux is destroyed, are you virtually telling me that you accept as true with he'll be able to maintain onto the wand with 7 vampires aiming to take it from him? Edward had a factor. I could not genuinely deny that. I hate the idea of any of you going up against him. Tears formed on the corners of my eyes. I attempted to blink them lower back, but my trembling voice had already alerted Edward. He took the mahogany wand from my left hand so that it will update it along with his personal, and I squeezed his hands with all my power as they locked together with mine. He stopped and held me lower back, indicating for his family to rejoin the others. We'll be there in a minute, he told them, his eyes never leaving my face. They departed without a word. Knowledge our present want for privateness. The second one they were long past. Edward pressed my body to his, wrapping my arms securely around his neck and swinging my legs as much as circle his waist. Then his marble lips have been towards my tender ones, which molded themselves round his as our kiss spread out. It was not anything like our usual kisses, now not careful or hesitant, as to save you inflicting injury upon the fragile, little human, however, became filled with an brilliant sense of urgency, a desperate want, on both our parts, to talk every gram of choice and love we felt for one another. When the kiss ultimately ended, I held my face against Edward's, cooling my burning cheeks against his ideal, icy skin. He traced soothing patterns up and down my spine, even as I targeting returning my pulse to its standard rhythm. Please do not do something reckless when the fight begins once more, he stated in the end. There will always been one of us there to protect you, but promise me you'll do the whole thing you may to hold yourself safe. As I seemed into Edward's eyes, I realized they had been swimming with excessive desperation and unshakable fear. The best component I may want to compare it with turned into what I had seen just earlier than he had left me to move and hunt James, however even those emotions were watery in evaluation. He was fighting an surprising enemy, one that, no matter the entirety, had avoided demise over and over. If it had been a vampire the Cullens had been putting themselves up in opposition to, I am sure Edward could have been exuding absolute confidence in their ability to protect me, but they were not, and irrespective of how robust or agile each member of his circle of relatives befell to be, we each knew that this became a totally distinct breed of monster. I promise, I stated, in reply to his call for, however you need to do the same. You have to maintain safe, too. I can. And then he kissed me one final time, before we headed off once more within the course of the others. I came across quite a few occasions as we made our manner to the incredible corridor. It changed into best to be predicted, of route, with the steady obstructions of fallen stone and splintered wooden lining the ground, but I could not argue that I would been looking my steps carefully. I used to be determined now not to take my eyes from Edward's face, trailing my eyes, once again, alongside the ridge of nostril, and over his faded, full lips, though I used to be completely convinced that I already knew every color and perspective with the aid of heart. In the end, whilst we were together, in much less disturbing situations, I by no means stopped looking at him. We had just reached the grand staircase once I caught a few unknown emotion flash across his eyes. For the very briefest second, his frame went absolutely rigid. What's wrong? I requested right now. His eyes determined mine, and he blinked rapidly, as though coming back from a few kind of daydream. It is nothing. I used to be approximately to protest, but then I caught sight of Angelina and Katie a little further off. They were sporting the limp frame of a Lady Ravenclaw pupil. She became petite and had stunning, thick red curls. Her pores and skin became dotted in places with freckles, and her eyes have been a top-notch sapphire blue, and then I felt the illness overtake me as I understand that they have been lifeless. They regarded up blindly as Fred's had, absolutely devoid of existence. Edward gripped my hand in his as I suppressed the rising lump in my throat, alongside the massive urge to go to portions. I knew that could come later, but if I commenced now, there has been a good chance I wouldn't be able to stop in time for the war. Once I subsequently did allow the grief to clean over me, I wanted to address it without interruption. It might be less difficult that manner. Right here, permit me, Edward stated, drawing near my friends to alleviate them of the girl. Why do not you be part of the others? You should relaxation. Angelina and Katie did not take an awful lot convincing. They have been difficult enough that they might have carried on without succumbing to physical fatigue. However, the project of getting to appearance upon the useless turned into leaving them mentally and emotionally tired. Katie closed the lady's eyes before thanking Edward and leaving with Angelina. I walked beside Edward as we made our way after them. On our way, we exceeded Neville and Wood. They were sharing the weight of a Hufflepuff student. This time it became a male. He became tall and lean, and had a head of thick black hair. I looked away quickly, no longer robust enough to address the sight, and walked through the big open doorways of the extremely good corridor. Madame Pomfrey was positioned at the front on the raised platform, her attention dedicated totally to the injured. Carlyle was along with her, though his abilities had been not in particular useful inside the modern-day state of affairs, mainly when he had no tools to deal with the various individuals. He regarded to resign himself to comforting the ones in ache, imparting small gestures, like preserving their arms. Within the center of the corridor turned into an extended line of bodies. They appeared non-violent, and might have been unsuitable for sleepers, for only some had had their functions marked by way of ugly wounds and gashes. I assumed that that was the one and best comfort of Avada Kedavra. There was no prolonged struggling, the consequences have been immediately. My eyes flew to the Weasleys accrued around Fred's frame. I could most effective stand to have a look at them for a second, before I had to turn away. I couldn't undergo to watch George as he crouched over the top of his dead twin. His face changed into overflowing with grief and despair, raw from the infinite tears cascading down his freckled pores and skin. This will be the hardest on him. He had misplaced a half of himself to the dying eaters. Come away, Bela, Edward whispered, one hand on the small of my returned, the other weaving our arms collectively, as he pulled me inside the path of Esme and Rosalie. They were stood with their backs to the wall, trying to consolation one another. Bela, Esme said as we reached them, pulling me far away from her son right into a loving, motherly embody. I allowed a single tear to get away my eyes as I stood with my face pressed towards her neck. She considered one of her hands and used it to stroke the total duration of my hair. Finally, she released me lower back to Edward, and regardless of the reality that her frozen vampiric body allowed her no tears of her own, I may want to see, as her awareness swept the growing line of the eternal sleepers, that she become allowing the grief of our collective loss to overhaul her. It become written along her brow, it became swimming in her eyes, and it turned into audible in her hitched and rapid breathing. Certainly, a person as loving and passionate as Esme could suffer in one of these scenarios, even though the useless were strangers to her. So younger, Rosalie whispered. A lot promise. I nodded, even though her expression remained stiff, her eyes abruptly full of a ferocious hate. My instincts advised me to look away, but I fought them off, determined to satisfy her gaze. Don't worry, Bela, she persevered, we'll ensure that it wasn't for not anything. And then my hand become in hers, and she or he turned into squeezing it tightly. After my flight to Volterra and Rosalie's disclosure of the info of her transformation, our dating had advanced a touch. I knew that she turned into, in my opinion, indignant via my choice to end up a permanent member of the Cullen family, believing as she did that I was foolishly forsaking my valuable mortality, and she or he would never completely like me because of it. I don't assume that that turned into something that I might ever be able to alternate. Sure, she may learn to take delivery of me. In component, I think she already had. However, there could constantly be that unavoidable resentment that she would by no means be capable of get-handed. It made her type and tender gesture all of the extra significant, and I used to be without a doubt grateful to have her with me at Hogwarts, in what should thoroughly be the final struggle towards Voldemort and the Death Eaters. I smiled at her appreciatively, and squeezed her hand in return. Then she released me and addressed the alternative. I am going to help the others, she stated, earlier than leaving the hall in a blur of gold and white. What are the others doing? I requested, my eyes flicking upwards so that I could look at Edward. He had a completely some distance off look about him, his forehead furrowing infinitesimally above his vacant eyes. It become too much for Jasper, so they went to help accumulate the lifeless, he stated absently, frightening a sharp stab in the pit of my stomach. I jerked all of a sudden, rousing Edward from his seeming trance. He looked at me for a protracted second, caressing my cheek with his finger hints as he did so. They moved downwards, and spent a minute stroking alongside my decreased lip, before he sooner or later spoke. Why didn't you tell me, Bela? His eyes sparked with pain. I had to say something. I could not allow him to trust that I failed to consider him. I may want to tell that opportunity turned into saturating his thoughts, and it harmed him. There have been too many external factors, I explained quietly, hoping he might be able to receive my reasoning. First, I desired to get to recognize you and your own family before I found out my mystery. It is not simply mine, in any case there may be an entire international of humans like me. I waved my hand slowly, indicating the wizards and witches occupying the corridor. Edward nodded in expertise. However, then James came about, which behind schedule matters a bit. And, then, as I used to be operating my manner as much as telling you, you were gone. His posture stiffened for a second, and that I knew he changed into experiencing every other horrible wave of guilt and regret. I felt awful for bringing it up, however he desired an evidence. I would have admitted the whole lot as quickly as I realized that you had been going to live with me, but I had Arrow to worry about, and I used to be anxious that he'd want me a lot extra if he knew what I was able to. Plus, I did not want to be answerable for some form of wizard manhunt. I am so sorry, Edward. I can't believe how disappointed you re with me. His hand became all of sudden tucked below my chin, pulling it upwards and preventing me from searching away. Bela, there is nothing wrong with trying to defend yourself and buddies. I know which you would have told me if you can have, and that I understand that you couldn't just blurt out your mystery the second one we met. If there's everyone who can appreciate the significance of anonymity, it is my own family and I. I am just sorry I had to wait so long to ultimately see the actual you. You are not upset, I requested, now that you recognize I am now not as fragile as you thought. In spite of the entirety, his lips curved upwards a tiny fraction on the corners. Oh, I would not move as a long way to mention which you weren't fragile. You re nevertheless human, in the end, and I am nevertheless a vampire. But seeing the lengths you would go to guard your pals the way you have got carried out tonight properly, you could recognize, virtually, why that might make me as proud as I am to have you ever. The comfort was instantaneous and absolute. It became like taking a breath after being plunged under a watery floor for a long way too lengthy. I beat my face again into Edward's chest and allowed him to snake his arms around my back again. We stayed like that for some time, and I was content material inside the know-how that if I had been to die within the following few hours, I wouldn't have spent the time earlier than my closing struggle looking to do anything. However, that final concept induced a sort of spark in my head, and that I felt something niggling away at my mind, though I could not pretty work out precisely what it become. After which it ignited into existence, and I was all of sudden livid with myself. I had forgotten to inform Edward of what I had witnessed all through the Dementor assault. I should have been spending the hour telling him approximately his soul of how, regardless of its tiny size, it shone brilliantly like a miniature megastar, in place of losing time discussing myself. If I died inside the immediate future, he might in no way understand the fact. Edward, I said urgently, there's something Bela, he interrupted, his posture all at once going rigid. I seemed up, and saw that his eyes had been as wide as saucers, his mouth hanging open slightly and forming a small O. I must go. What are you? I am needed. The others need me to assist with the bodies. Here he said, placing the mahogany wand returned in my unfastened hand. I will be again soon. Stay with Esme. And then, earlier than I had a threat to protest, Edward was moving far away from me, just as Rosalie had in vague blur of snowy pores and skin and shining bronze hair. EPOV. My feet barely touched the ground as I flew from Bela's side and out of the great hall. Being away from her was almost painful, especially at a time like this, but there was no way that I could stand by and allow this to transpire. It simply couldn't happen. I wouldn't let it. I ran through the doors and into the paved courtyard, where I darted behind an undamaged stone pillar, concealing myself from view as I waited. There were a couple of humans nearby that I recognized. One was Oliver Wood, who had fought beside my family and I in the clock tower. The other was Neville Longbottom, the boy who had so willingly accepted us, despite our differences. As I stood there in those following minutes, I cast my mind back over everything that had happened since we had all heard the plate crash to the floor in the middle of the kitchen. I felt like I'd been thrown into some kind of maelstrom. Everything had been turned upside down. All my careful reasoning, our lives, reality itself. I was ashamed to say that initially I had thought that Bela had lost her mind. In fact, it even occurred to me that perhaps she had never fully been right in all the time that I'd known her. It would certainly have explained why she was so comfortable with the idea of being in such close proximity with a family of creatures whose primary instincts told them to eat her. And then, of course, she was dazzling us all with her undeniable magic, and, in no time at all, here we were, preparing for battle alongside an entire school of individuals, all of whom seemed to receive us with similar ease and fascination. I could barely get my head around the idea. I had thought that nothing would surprise me after that. Naturally, I was wrong. It seemed to be a recurring thing recently, though it was certainly not something I was used to. I was used to being right. My mind-reading abilities meant that I was very rarely shocked or caught off guard. Bela with her private and impenetrable mind had, understandably, had the power to change that. Before her, I had been used to the generic petty thoughts and selfishness of the typical human mind. It wasn't a very common occurrence that I discovered a genuine individual. People often concealed their nasty and resentful musings behind a kind and friendly facade. There were a few exceptions, of course, like Angela Weber. But until today, my opinion of the human race had been fairly pessimistic. My experiences had led me to develop very little confidence in the mortals populating the planet, and I had believed that any positive qualities were limited to a very select few the human anomalies. Now, on the other hand, everything I had initially believed had been shattered in an instant, and all it had taken were a few simple words, fueled by fear and self-interest. And all those qualities, which I had considered alien to most, had erupted with full force, exploding like fire through the great hall. The others had seen it, and Jasper had felt it, but I had heard it. In the immediate seconds following Pansy Parkinson's outburst, I had witnessed human nature at its very best. The room had been bursting with unstoppable courage and the absolute desire to protect. There had been no reluctance detectable in their thoughts, instead they had been filled with sheer determination. Neville, especially, had demonstrated such. His mind was possibly one of the purest I had ever encountered, and was brimming with the longing to do good, to reject Voldemort and his pure blood creed until the very end. And then, of course, there was Snape. I had heard the stories from Bela. She had told us all of his betrayal of Dumbledore, and his loyalty to Voldemort, and every mind that had been set against that abomination had all confirmed the stories of the Hogwarts headmaster. But he fooled them. He deceived every last one of them, and as I stood in the great hall with Bela, seeing Snape's memories through Harry's eyes, I finally understood why he had to become an accomplished declumens. He'd been one of them, a Death Eater, yet had managed to return from the very darkest place imaginable, simply out of love. And he had willingly done it all without acknowledgement from those around him, earning himself the reputation of a backstabbing, evil and cowardly murderer, when in fact he'd been the opposite, a hero. The world obviously wasn't as grey as I'd led myself to believe. I thought about it as I heard Harry arrive beneath his invisibility cloak, the sound of his thudding heart audible to my ears. He watched Oliver telling Neville that he could handle the weight of the small, dead boy without help. He recognized the boy as Colin Creevey. Then, when Wood was out of sight and earshot, Harry addressed Neville, who almost jumped out of his skin in response. Harry pulled off the invisibility cloak to make the coming conversation easier for his friend. "Where are you going alone?" Neville asked suspiciously. He'd better not be thinking of giving in to Voldemort. "It's all part of the plan," said Harry. "There's something I've got to do." "Listen, Neville." "Harry." Neville looked suddenly scared. "Harry, you're not thinking of handing yourself over?" "Yes." "No." Harry lied easily. "Course not. This is something else. But I might be out of sight for a while. You know Voldemort's snake, Neville. He's got a huge snake, calls it Nagini. I've heard." "Yeah, what about it?" "It's got to be killed. Ron and Hermione know that, but just in case they..." Harry's mind flew over the terrible possibility that his two best friends would not survive the approaching battle. It was almost impossible for him to continue, but he knew he had a job to complete, and he needed backups who would devote themselves to destroying the Horcrux. Bella and Edward know Edward destroyed the goblet. He's set on bringing Voldemort down, too. Still, Neville is as committed to this as much as I am. It wouldn't hurt to tell him. He's definitely trustworthy. I felt a swell of appreciation for Harry. He recognized good people like Neville, and on top of that he had demonstrated confidence in me, the stranger vampire. "Just in case they busy and you get the chance. Kill the snake." "Kill the snake," Harry repeated. "All right, Harry, you okay, are you?" "I am fine. Thanks, Neville." Neville seized his wrist just as Harry made to move on. "We all going to keep fighting, Harry," stated Neville. "You know that. We not going to give in to scum like Voldemort and Bellatrix Lestrange." "Yeah." Harry broke off, the suffocating feeling extinguishing the end of his sentence. It didn't seem to matter though. Neville patted Harry on the shoulder, mistakenly assuming that his sudden inability to speak was a result of gratitude, when in actuality it was guilt which caused it. The way Harry saw it, too many people had died to save him, too many people had given their lives to protect him from Voldemort. He couldn't allow it anymore. It was his turn to face death, and if doing so meant the world was one step closer to freedom, it would be worth it. As Neville left to go and search for more bodies, Harry continued on his walk towards the Forbidden Forest. I followed silently after him, ensuring that I was well enough concealed, whilst searching through the minds of the students to discover whether or not there were any more between us in the forest. I sensed 2 females up ahead, recognizing one of them as Fred's sister, Ginny. She was comforting an injured girl who was crying for her mother. I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to fight. I want to go home. I want to go home to Mum. I don't want to fight anymore. It's too big, too much, the girl thought. Ginny had just lost a family member, and already she was out reassuring others. There it was again, the selflessness, the proof that the world was not a bleary painting comprising solely of murky grays. When Bela had flashed into my life, she had burnt brightly against the dulling obscurity, like a beacon in a thick mist. For the very first time, I had found a truly brilliant highlight. My brilliant highlight. Now I realized they were everywhere, prominent and dazzling against the dull grays and the deep shadows. Harry remained invisible as we neared and passed the girls, all the while wishing that time would allow him an opportunity to hold Ginny. Even if there had been more of it, though, he wouldn't have used it, because otherwise he would have never found the strength to let go. Finally, the minds of the Hogwarts residents were behind us, and the only others now were situated somewhere within the Forbidden Forest. Harry was approaching a wooden hut, and I used this as my opportunity, sneaking up around the back and cutting him off. He stopped for a second, surprised at seeing me separated from my family, but then Bela's revelation came back to him. "How long have you been listening?" he asked, pulling off his cloak. "Ever since we were separated," I answered calmly, understanding his question. I saw all of Snape's memories. He was a very brave man. "The bravest," Harry nodded, his eyes swimming suddenly with both respect and gratitude for the secret hero. Then, for a moment, neither of us spoke. Harry suspected my reason for following him. In part, he hoped that his suspicions were correct, and that I'd tug him, against his will, back to the castle, back to place where he would be surrounded by friends and loved ones. "Why are you here, Edward?" he finally asked via his mind. "You know why," I said sternly, noting the way his heart rate increased and his jaw clenched. I didn't need to read his mind to know that he was conflicted. For the briefest second, his eyes shot in the direction of the castle, before darting away again and settling on the ancient trees at the edge of the forest. "You know you have to let me go." "Like hell I do," I growled angrily. "I refuse to allow you to sacrifice yourself to that bastard. We'll find a way to kill him." "How?" he asked, sadness seeping into his bright green irises, the sides of his mouth twitching to form a cheerless and knowing smile. "We'll find a way. There has to be something we can do too." "Edward," he interrupted, raising a hand to silence me. "Other than Nagini, I am his final Horcrux. You know that you heard it." "I did, but nothing. As long as I live, Voldemort will live too. Even with the death of his snake, nothing you could do would be enough to kill him, because the last fragment of his soul, the piece that latched itself onto me, will always be there holding him to life. Maybe we won't be able to kill him," I said desperately, "but we could find a way to imprison him or something." "We could. It has to end," Harry shouted, anger filling his voice this time. "Look at what he's done, what he'll continue to do. He has to die, and if that means that I have to as well, then so be it. Hundreds of people have given their lives to help bring him down. If I don't go to him now and allow him to kill me, their deaths will have been for nothing." "Harry, please," I whispered. The sad smile returned to his face as his eyes locked with mine. "What about Bela, Edward?" Harry thought, opting for a different approach. "Bela is a Muggle born. How do you think it will be for her when Voldemort takes full control? He'll not be able to touch her, he'll not know where she is. We'll be back in Washington and who's to say that he won't become more ambitious after he's taken Britain? Who's to say he won't want to extend his control and his doctrines further? He is immortal, after all. It's not like he's short on time. And even if he did stick to home, why should people like Bela have to run away, simply to ensure their safety? What about the people that don't get that far? What about the people that are caught and sent to Azkaban?" He showed me a memory then. It was one depicting an experience with a Dementor, as he called it, and explaining how it felt when it began feeding off a person's despair. I didn't need his mental portrayal. I could remember all too clearly what it felt like to be in close proximity to those demons. I had tried to fight them off when they encountered me during the battle. I had fought with every ounce of strength in those first few seconds, but an overwhelming tidal wave of loneliness, guilt, and grief had suddenly rendered me powerless, and I found that despite my incredible strength I could not fight them. I had relived the worst and darkest moments of my existence, hearing the echoing screams of countless terrified victims, all of which became desperate throaty gurgles as I sliced my venomous teeth into the soft, welcoming flesh of their throats. And, then, the weight of it all seemed to lift abruptly, and I could finally breathe again. I could see Bela's face and, despite the freshness of the resurrected past, I suddenly felt warmth wrap around my long-dead heart. The experience was a little hazy, somehow, and I still wasn't entirely sure what could have happened to force the Dementors to flee. I suspected that Bela had something to do with their sudden disappearance. I would have to remember to ask her about it. Would you wish that on anyone else? Of course I wouldn't, I whispered, appalled at the idea of any individual having to undergo that level of torment. What monster would? He would, said Harry, simply. Voldemort would. It's already happening. People like Bela Muggle-borns are being forced to surrender themselves to the Ministry for registration. Then they re-thrown into Azkaban, where they suffer at the hands of the Dementors. I couldn't suppress the shudder that vibrated down the full length of my spine in the ensuing seconds. Harry saw it, and he pressed on, sensing victory. There will be people in that place right now, innocent people that will be to others what Bela is to you. Are you going to let them do it, Edward? He asked, more serious than ever. Are you going to let them win? I held my breath for a moment, desperately wishing that the sinking feeling in my gut would disappear. This could not be the answer. What will I say? What will I tell them? I struggled, feeling my resolve slipping increasingly with each passing moment. When they ask me why I stood by and let you, the one they fought so hard to protect, to walk away from me, into the forest to die. Harry gave a very kind smile, then, as he delivered his immediate answer. Tell them I said it was for the greater good. He held out his palm, waiting for me to extend my own. I did, and he squeezed it tightly as we shook. Make sure you kill the snake. I nodded, and then rip his goddamn head off. In the next second, Harry threw his invisibility cloak back over his head, and was turning and walking away from me, towards the forest. I saw his steps through his mind, and heard the crunching of twigs and the rustling of grasses as he made them. Just before he reached the edge of the trees, something occurred to him. He remembered something about a snitch in the pouch at his neck. His nerveless fingers fumbled with it for a moment, and then he managed to successfully extract a little, golden ball. He hesitated, at first, simply looking at the thing. His thoughts were a little too disjointed to make sense of. I caught something about a will, and resurrection, and opening at the close, but my knowledge was too limited, and the only part that immediately made sense was the last thought, as Harry lifted the snitch to his lips and whispered, I am about to die. The gold casing cracked open to reveal a small onyx stone engraved with a strange design that I did not recognize. That wasn't so surprising now. Apparently I was ignorant of many things. Before I knew what was happening, 4 bodies had appeared beside Harry's. I saw them through his eyes. I recognized one of them as the werewolf, Remus Lupin. He stood amongst 2 other males and a female. There was something extremely abnormal about their substance. In truth, it couldn't be said that any one of them was completely solid. On the other hand, they bore no resemblance to the ghosts that I had seen in the Great Hall. They weren't transparent, yet neither were they really there. I searched for their minds, in the hopes that doing so would help me to piece together the mystery, but it was useless. I certainly sensed something, but it was the equivalent of trying to distinguish a person's words as they traveled through a thick expanse of undulating water. The thoughts were too faint and blurred to decipher. It hit me suddenly that I could only detect one heartbeat in the nearby area, which was Harry's. I was utterly stumped. Nothing made any sense whatsoever. The 4 newcomers were there, yet they weren't. Then the woman spoke. You've been so brave. She's looking at me. My mum. Like she did in the mirror, like I always imagined. Only this is real. She's here. Finally. You're nearly there, said the man bearing a striking resemblance to Harry. This was surely James Potter. Very close. We are so proud of you. But Lily and James Potter were dead. Bela had told me and my family their story. This couldn't be happening. They were dead. Then, again, So was Sir Nicholas, yet he still somehow managed to float about the castle. But he was ectoplasm, a mere imprint, like the lingering smell of a meal after the table has been cleared. This was something else, something beyond impossible. "Does it hurt?" Harry asked. "Dying? Not at all," said the unknown man. "Quicker and easier than falling asleep." It was true. Then the small group surrounding Harry were not of the living, they belonged in the afterlife. Harry stroked the resurrection stone nestled between his fingers as he expressed his sadness and regret with his old professor. It felt shameful to be eavesdropping on this conversation, especially when it was so incredibly personal, but I couldn't bring myself to leave Harry's mind. I was determined to stick with him until the very end. If at any moment he altered his decision, I would know to go after him. Of course, there was also a less noble reason, and I felt completely disgusted with myself because of it. The afterlife had always been a delicate topic for me, which was mainly due to the fact that I didn't believe that heaven was possible for my kind. We were soulless, after all, monsters that dreamed of blood and killing. If any gate in the next life was open to us, I was positive which one it would be. Still, I was hungry for the answers to my questions, no matter how insignificant. I was not prepared, therefore, to allow the resurrected from my sight. It was when Lily and James began walking beside their son as he headed to meet death that I realized there was no other choice but to permit it all to unfold. If a mother, who had willingly given her own life to save her only child, did not protest as she guided him down the path to fulfill his final destiny, there could be no denying that this, however unfair and horrible, was the right thing. It was for the greater good. How ironic. I felt absolutely sick, nonetheless, and my fingers crushed into the bark of one of the trees as I rested my forehead against the wood. I punched it suddenly and it snapped as easily as a matchstick, the tree tumbling swiftly to the ground as a consequence. Lily smiled lovingly as the crowd made their way through the forest. Her eyes lingered on her son as his did on her, and the sight filled him with courage and pushed him forwards. It was his parents' obvious pride that dispelled my shame. If his death truly was an inevitability, I wanted to watch it. Not to do so would have been dishonoring him. Harry was a martyr, one who was sacrificing himself for the lives of others. The story of his courage and altruism was one which deserved to be spread amongst those opposing Voldemort. I promised myself then that I would ensure that it did. And so I watched and listened as Harry passed the Death Eaters beneath his invisibility cloak, unbeknownst to them. I watched as he followed them deeper into the shadows of the forest. I watched as he arrived in the clearing where Voldemort and his followers were assembled, and heard him announce his presence. The resurrection stone slipped from his fingers, and his family disappeared from both his and my sight, returned, no doubt, to the place reserved for good souls. I stood frozen as I reached the castle doors. If my heart had been capable of beating, it would have surely punched a hole in my ribcage by now. "Harry Potter," said the snake-like man in an exceedingly soft voice. The boy who lived. For one minuscule moment, I was overwhelmed by curiosity and an intense impulse. I flitted to Voldemort's mind for a fraction of a second, before immediately returning to Harry's. The one moment had been enough, though. Behind the satisfaction, the anticipation, and the desire which Voldemort exuded, there was an insatiable and unmistakable fear. It sprung from one main source, the fear of death. Harry was the one person who Voldemort considered capable of bringing about his destruction, the one person who could make his greatest terrors a reality. For that reason, Harry had to die. I saw as Voldemort lifted his wand, an expression of curiosity formed on his unnatural face. Suddenly, the words were spilling from his mouth and a flash of green light was heading straight for Dumbledore's prodigy. There was no acknowledgement of pain in the final second, just a vacuous space where only a moment before, the brilliant thoughts of a blinding highlight had burned with life. Now, in the cold and sinister depths of the forbidden forest, all that resided were dark spots and deadly shadows. As a minimum 5 minutes handed earlier than I felt calm sufficient to walk lower back into the wonderful hall. I had needed the time to get it together, otherwise I in all likelihood might have ended up crushing a few a part of Bela in the course of our reunion. Once I had in the end regained manipulate, and the urge to pummel everything to dirt had diminished barely, I returned through large doors to rejoin the others. I heard the minds of my family before I saw them. They had finished amassing the bodies of dull students and have been now huddled collectively in a nook of the terrific hall. Jasper changed into still suffering. He sat towards a wall with his head in his arms, fighting to live afloat as the present day of ache and agony time and again threatened to drag him under. How did I stand this? Even earlier than I acquired my powers, how did I take care of this each day? His thoughts flew to the comrades he had visible die in conflict when he had served in the civil conflict. Each time he misplaced one he felt a horrific stab of ache, but it had surpassed quick within the rush of all of it. War, in his experience, rarely allowed human beings time to lament. The second you stopped resisting the overwhelming wave of grief, you made yourself prone. Jasper's rank had supposed that falling to portions became an unpardonable offense. Demonstrating power and focus have been an absolute necessity, not handiest to set an example to his guys, but to ensure their safety to the fullest possible volume. He become a breaking factor now, even though the emotional climate became turning into an excessive amount for him to undergo. I could take into account that there had in no way been a time when I had regretted my telepathy more than I did now. Mrs. Weasley's mind were the worst. They conveyed a sorrow so bottomless that I personally felt in danger of falling into somewhere darkish and void of hope. I pulled out and did my best to block her. She jogged my memory an excessive amount of Renesmee and the inner turmoil that she had suffered after losing her personal son. As I approached my circle of relatives, Bela observed me and immediately ran into my open arms. Her face was stained with tears. Certainly she hadn't been able to suppress the grief as successfully as she was hoping for. I pressed her against my chest and buried my face into her hair. Soon sufficient, she would examine that death had taken any other of her buddies, and her pain would be improved, especially upon realizing that I had stood by using and permit it happen. I had no concept what I would say to her. There was no manner that she could ever be able to deem my actions justifiable. She turned into selfless. If I informed her that I had allowed Harry to die so that she could have a risk at a higher future, she would probably hate me. She have to hate me. I hated myself. Jasper's head snapped up as he discerned my shame and self-loathing. Edward, I averted my gaze, unable to fulfill the questioning eyes of my brother. It became the wrong flow. It tipped him off and reinforced his situation. What's befell? He demanded. I couldn't stand to see Bela's ache accentuated. I realized that it changed into inevitable, but I wanted to put off that for as long as possible. Harry, I responded, whispering the phrase at a degree she would not be capable of come across. Right now, Jasper became on his feet and as alert and inflexible as the others, who all stood as still as statues, everyone praying that I was no longer approximately to deliver information of a devastating kind. My breathing was hitched and ragged, so I inhaled deeply earlier than I murmured out the tale. Harry changed into the final Horcrux. Voldemort's soul became so unstable after he again and again ripped it to pieces, that he inadvertently divided it a seventh time when his curse backfired on him the night he went to spoil the Potters. That fragment has been with Harry ever because, so whilst he lived, Voldemort could as well. I squeezed my eyes tighter shut, not able to satisfy the eyes of my father. I felt like I had failed him too, by hook or by crook. I left the corridor to head after him, to prevent him. However, I could not. I comprehend it as still inexcusable. However, by allowing one death, I was hoping to keep 100 extra. I am so sorry, Carlyle. Edward, he notion, after a moment of silence. Son. I opened my eyes. Carlyle's expression was full of sadness, however it became also considered one of understanding. I cannot imagine how difficult it became with a purpose to stand by way of and permit him to it, but I know you properly enough to peer which you did it because there was no other choice. I should have dragged him again kicking and screaming. I should not have allowed him do it. If it have been the other way round, he persevered cautiously, and also you were the very last Horcrux, could you have sacrificed yourself, knowing that extra humans could die if you chose no longer to, and that Bela could very well be considered one of them? Of course I might, I whispered, affronted. You recognize what I would do if something had been to take place to her. And the others, in case you knew Bela could be safe no matter your selection. I concept for a second, earlier than giving my head an infinitesimal shake. It was mild enough that Bela would not have felt it. I don't think I would be able to stay with myself if I had to battle that form of guilt. I already have sufficient of that to final existence time. Then do not blame yourself for something when you realize it was the proper aspect. Harry glaringly knew it. He turned into brave. It become his distinctive feature now, not your faults that brought about his dying. He smiled at me then, but it changed into bleak, and his eyes quick flew to Hermione and Ron, who have been status in addition up the corridor locked in an include. Hermione's face became buried in the crook of Ron's neck, her arms locked firmly at the back of his head, whilst he pressed his face into her hair. Drops of moisture have been scattered over the strands, and sparkled like tiny diamonds inside the amber light of the encompassing torches. There had been greater clinging to Ron's collarbone, each of which had left a glimmering trail along his skin. "How will we tell them?" Alice asked, looking inside the identical route as Carlyle's. Her gaze flicked in brief to Bela then, before it settled on me. In reality, I had sincerely no concept. I used to be approximately to enlighten my sister of that truth when the high, cold voice echoed through the air for the 1-3 time. Everybody fell silent immediately. "Harry Potter is lifeless. He was killed as he ran away, trying to keep himself even as you lay down your lives for him. We deliver you his body as proof that your hero is long gone." My jaw clenched and a low menacing snarl ripped through my tooth. In that second, there has been not anything in the International that I desired extra than to rip Voldemort to shreds. I desired it for Harry, for Bela, for Fred, and for the endless innocents that have been suffering within the cells of Azkaban. Horror turned into visible at the face of each human within the ensuing moments as they battled feebly against the terrible phrases and the lousy reality. "The war is won," Voldemort continued. "You have misplaced half of your opponents. My demise eaters outnumber you and the boy who lived is completed. There have to be no more battle. Absolutely everyone who keeps to resist, man, woman, or child, will be slaughtered, as will each member in their own family. Pop out of the citadel, now, kneel earlier than me, and you will be spared. Your mother and father and youngsters, your brothers and sisters will live, and be forgiven, and you'll be a part of me within the new world we will construct together." The merciless voice fell silent, best to get replaced with the aid of the shrill and anguished cries of Professor McGonagall as she ran the duration of the corridor toward the exit. "Out of my way," she screamed, her eyes thick with tears. "Please, please allow it no longer be true. No longer him, no longer Harry. Please," Bella begged, echoing the mind of her trainer. "Tell me he's lying, Edward. Inform me Harry's alive." I couldn't communicate. All I could do turned into stare into her tortured, chocolate eyes as they welled with fat, glistening tears. Her respiration had become uneven as she gasped in large breaths of air. Her eyes flashed to the door, via which the students, instructors, and families had been flying, their wands clasped tightly as they headed for the front line. Bella disengaged herself from my embody and pulled both wands from her pocket, earlier than she sprinted off after the relaxation to meet the dying eaters, my own family and I running beside her. McGonagall's scream ripped the air simply as we emerged into the open. It became followed by way of 3 haunting cries from Ron, Hermione, and Ginny, as every broke freed from the gang. The sound turned into a trigger just like the resolute pressure that pushes the primary domino, in turn ensuring a similar destiny for the others inside the chain. The crowd erupted in shouts and screams of abuse, all directed closer to the commonplace enemy, who trembled with fury at the ongoing resistance. I lurched forward into my looking crouch, relishing the opportunity to ruin the monster once and for all. I felt a feral snarl constructing in my chest, however a whisper at my ear quelled it before I had the threat to set it loose. "Edward," Emmett whispered, his voice surprisingly hard in his urgency, "his neck. Examine Harry's neck." I accompanied his preparation, allowing my line of sight to drop to the boy laid at Voldemort's fort, my frame freezing absolutely as I used to be met by way of an impossible image. There, clean and robust beneath the grimy protected membrane of pores and skin, was irrefutable proof that there was nonetheless motive to hope somehow, despite the absolute impossibility, Harry Potter was alive, his pulse giving testimony to that one perfect truth, bolstered with the aid of the resurrection of his thoughts. I unfroze and straightened, my head turning fractionally to the aspect in order that I may want to meet the eyes of my family. I nodded, earlier than focusing my interest on Bella. She turned into screaming at the side of the others, conquered by way of both fury and grief. Voldemort flashed his wand over and over and tried to silence the group, however nothing he did turned into strong sufficient to keep them. He was killed whilst looking to sneak out of the fortress grounds, Voldemort raged, after flourishing his wand once more to stifle the opposing voices. I took my threat and pulled Bella into me, information that it might be some distance less complicated to get her attention at the same time as she changed into compelled into silence. He is no longer useless. She jerked and unexpectedly have become inflexible. He has a pulse, and I hear his thoughts, I murmured in her ear, making sure that it changed into at a stage that simplest she and my family might perceive. Ready yourself. It is about to start. As her eyes met mine, I noticed that they had been swimming with gratitude. I felt a mild strain on my palm, and regarded all the way down to see that she had transferred the yuan to her left hand for you to lace her fingers through mine. I guessed that she become the usage of all her power as she squeezed my palm in thanks, due to the fact her knuckles had become white. Within the next second, her hand had separated from mine, which changed into then replaced by way of her wand again. She grew to become back to face Voldemort, her eyes narrowing as attention and determination swept her lovely features. All at once, a voice demanded my interest. It changed into so loud and irritated that it blocked out the entirety else, and I nearly mistakenly assumed that the words had been spilling forth orally. However, they were not. They formed the mental conflict cry of Neville Longbottom as he charged closer to the snake-like man, his each thought focused on Nagini, which not resided inside a shielding bubble. Earlier than he ought to reach Voldemort and his creature, however, a demise eater threw himself forwards and tackled him. The dying stick flashed and Neville's wand went flying as a resounding bang crammed the air. "And who's this?" Voldemort hissed softly. "Who has volunteered to demonstrate what takes place to those who keep to fight when the war is lost?" A female with wild, dark hair on his right gave a happy chuckle. "It is Neville Longbottom, my lord. The boy who has been giving the Carrows so much problem. The son of the Aurors, don't ye forget." "Ah yes, I consider," stated Voldemort, who seemed Neville with a glint of amusement in his eye because the boy struggled again to his toes. "If it hadn't been for Neville's mind, I don't suppose I might have been able to prevent myself from jumping at the enemy and crushing every bone in his frame." "Kill the snake. I ought to kill the snake," he chanted, repeating the phrases again and again so that they formed a few form of mantra. And there it slithered, so near and exposed, absolutely unaware that its master changed into not the meant target of Neville's courageous rate. I forced myself to remain still, setting each ounce of wish and agree with that I had inside the Hogwarts warrior, inclined him to complete the deadly reptile once and for all. "But you a natural blood, are not you, my courageous boy?" Voldemort asked. "So what if I am?" Neville responded, the disgust clean in his voice. "You show spirit, and bravado, and you return of noble stock. You may make a totally treasured loss of life eater. We want your type, Neville Longbottom. I will be part of you when hell freezes over." Dumbledore's navy. The students at the back of him, together with Bela, launched potent cheers in response and help of Neville's rejection. "Thoroughly," stated Voldemort silkily, his tone dripping with the threat of hazard. "If that is your preference, Neville Longbottom, we revert to the original plan. To your head, be it." Simply earlier than he ought to flash his wand, I threw myself into his thoughts, desperately praying that I would be capable of discover his plan and forestall him before he had the danger to initiate it. His thoughts changed into full of photographs of a tattered old hat, which at once propelled me right into a whirl of bewilderment. Accio sorting hat. I heard the whistling of air from someplace within the fort, as the hat shot along the corridors. A touch way off in the distance, there has been a hammering of feet in opposition to the earth, a far-off stampede that appeared to be heading in the direction of Hogwarts. A loud ruin from above announced the hat's arrival because it shot through a high window, shattering the glass because it did so. Nothing made experience. Absolutely, Voldemort may want to put off Neville with a killing curse. Yet again, I plunged myself back into his evil mind. Best this time I used to be met by way of a terrible imagining. I saw Neville's status as still as a statue, the rim of the hat falling over his eyes, while each he and the material burnt madly, completely overcome with the aid of licentious flames, which licked passionately at his flesh and gowns. The second the photo assaulted my mind, I had resumed my crouch again, each muscle in my frame coiled to spring. I felt my face crack right into a vicious snarl as my chest bubbled with hate. Although the others did now not know the reason at the back of my fury, they knew that it may most effective have been provoked through Voldemort's depraved schemes. As an end result, they observed my lead, leaning forwards in coaching, their venomous teeth bared and ready. All of a sudden, a recent reminiscence flooded my mind. I used to be inside the room of requirement taking note of Ron's thoughts and narrating them to Bela and my circle of relatives. The sorting hat, Bela defined. Harry pulled the sword out of it in second year. It offers itself to folks who reveal braveness. It's the fine which defines actual Gryffindors. My mind switched to every other reminiscence, the only whilst Bela and I had found out to Harry, Ron and Hermione our knowledge of the Horcruxes. Hermione had said that it wasn't viable to damage them through strength by myself, and that they needed to be put beyond magical restore. The sword of Gryffindor is tipped with basilisk venom, which best has one cure. Voldemort proclaimed that the sorting way of life at Hogwarts faculty changed into over, and that every pupil might live beneath the noble brand of Salazar Slytherin. Then he flicked his wand, causing Neville to grow stiff and unmoving, earlier than he crammed the hat down onto his head. The Dying Eaters raised their wands at the opposing wizards and witches, straight away, and then their master flicked the demise stick and set the hat alight. Rosalie launched a menacing snarl at the same time as the human beings screamed in horror. She turned into approximately to throw herself forwards in a fit of rage, but I grabbed a maintain of her just in time and pressured her lower back. Now not but, I entreated. Now not till the ultimate possible moan. He's about to go up in smoke, Edward. She cried. Just wait. Please trust me. Her head whipped to Neville, before her eyes zoomed past him into the gap, in which an enraged navy were storming over the faculty obstacles and hurtling forwards, screaming at the tops of their lungs as they flew for the Demise Eaters, every one possessing a look of primal, bloodthirsty hunger. A noisy rumble vibrated through the ground as a large of a person got here into view. He let out a determined yell, only to be met with the aid of an irritated surge of enemy giants, the force in their collision and resultant fight inflicting the earth to quake. It became the second after the centaurs at the edge of the wooded area launched a rain of arrows that it befell. A voice in Neville's ear cried, "We re-burning, boy, we re-completed." I would as a substitute burn than join him. Suddenly, a clunk issued from in the hat, and I knew surely that it had labored. Neville's body unfroze. His muscle tissues regarded to behave of their own accord, propelled into movement by using the determined want to fight. As the hat fell, he pulled from inside its depths the silver hilt of a ruby-encrusted sword. In one rapid and fluid motion, he swung it excessive above his frame and, with a robust cry of real, heroic courage, introduced it down upon the head of the snake. Voldemort's murderous scream right now pierced the air, as he forged a curse in Neville's course. It meditated off a shield though, simply as the cries of the half-massive carried over the heads of the opponents. "Harry, Harry, where's Harry? He is below the cloak," Alice whispered to Bela, who changed into scanning the place in panic. "Move." I scooped Bela up into my palms, and ran for the fortress. The multitude on the alternative side of the Dying Eaters turned into forcing them backwards toward the Hogwarts entrance. As we broke through the doors, Bela fired 2 flares of red mild over my shoulders, one from each wand, immediately ducking as a curse flew again at her from a retaliating foe. "Placed me down," she said. I followed her command and lowered her to the ground, before throwing myself on the Demise Eater who had dared to purpose a killing curse at my fiancé. "She's engaged to a vampire, you moron." My foot made touch together with his chest, thrusting him backwards at a deadly velocity. His head cracked into the stone wall, and he crumpled instantly to the ground, nothing more than an empty shell. I persisted to attack the oncoming loss of life eaters, all of the even as ensuring that Bela occupied a few portion of my attention. She jeweled as fiercely as a lion, and there has been no greater than a 2DSC language among each spell she forged. "Defindo," she shouted, aiming a wand at the large, steel bracket fastened to the wall above one of the Death Eaters. It fell and cracked the person at the again of his skull, instantly rendering him subconscious. Then she turned into capturing ropes out of the opposite wand, which flew via the air and wrapped across the body of another cloaked parent, stopping him from firing a spell at Dean Thomas. He struggled violently towards the binding. Possibly, Bela's subsequent spell became a means of deterring such behavior. With a flick of the mahogany wand, the ropes transformed right into a giant, hissing, anaconda, which eyed the loss of Life Eater hungrily. It opened its jaws and discovered its fangs. The person stopped his struggling right now, crushed by using terror as he seemed into the intense yellow eyes of the snake. Best then, because the loss of Life Eater ended his struggle for freedom, did the creature near its lethal jaws though its face remained hopeful. You re virtually proper at this form of factor, Aaron T.U., Rosalie stated proper earlier than she swung a dying eater via a stained glass window. Transfiguration always changed into my fine concern, Bela defined, a moderate smile on her face as she blasted some other enemy in opposition to the citadel wall. We persevered to fight within the resulting minutes each time a curse threatened to hit one of the college students. Either Carlyle, Esme, Rosalie, Alice or myself could launch ahead and block its direction. Emmett and Jasper, alternatively, had remained outside to struggle the giants. I looked for their minds, concerned for their safety. My worry, it appeared, turned into unnecessary. Both had hold of separate giants, and have been competing to peer who ought to throw them the furthest. They gripped the giants featuring and swung them spherical as if contending for the hammer throw gold in their vampire Olympics. Jasper's massive did not pretty make the lake. It crashed into the earth a few feet from it, and lay unmoving after the force of the autumn. Emmett's giant, on the other hand, plummeted simply off the center of the watery expanse. As its head broke the floor, it screamed and thrashed, even as a large tentacle rose from beneath and wrapped around the giant's head, which changed into pulled out of view inside the next 2D. A few sizable bubbles broke through the water, before the lake resumed its calm look over again. Sure, on your face, Emmett boomed at Jasper. Implausible, I muttered, retracting my attention from my fool brothers. Unexpectedly, a struggle cry from my left stuck my interest, and a navy of strange searching creatures swarmed into the doorway corridor, every one wielding kitchen implements which they used to attack the Death Eaters, screaming manically as they went. Combat, combat, ordered the leader. Combat for my master, defender of residence elves. Fight the Dark Lord within the call of brave Regulus. Fight, and fight they did, like ferocious little warriors, sinking their carving knives and enamel into the legs of the enemies. One among them even proceeded to bash the incarcerated dying eater over the pinnacle with a saucepan until he misplaced focus. The snake by no means moved to prevent the enraged creature, it simply watched the entire component with a look of indifference. Before long, the entrance corridor grew so cramped that we have been pressured to transport through to the super corridor. The horde spilled in after us, and inside a matter of minutes, students and parents have been organized round the rims of the room, whilst Voldemort and the wild-haired girl, who I soon learnt was named Bellatrix Lestrange, occupied the center. The latter changed into engaged in a duel with Hermione, Luna and Ginny, at the same time as her grasp stood battling McGonagall, Slughorn, and Kingsley. All of a surprising, Mrs. Weasley ran at Bellatrix, infuriated with the aid of the fact that she had very nearly caught Ginny with a killing curse. Not my daughter, you complain. Bellatrix launched a mad cackle as the girl approached her. Out of my manor, Mrs. Weasley shrieked, earlier than right away throwing her first spell at her opponent and setting out their duel. Light flew this way and that, the ground on the center developing hot and cracked as the curses met. Jasper and Emmett joined us then, and all of us appeared on in the direction of the center of the hall as the two separate battles unfolded. The wands of the watching students, instructors, and novices now not flourished. Instead, they hung peacefully at their master's aspects. Can you see whatever but, Alice? Jasper whispered. She shook her head in reaction. There are too many creatures here. Perhaps it is not most effective werewolves that block my visions. My eyes flew to Bellatrix as she erupted into some other in shape of laughter. What's going to manifest in your kids while I have killed you? She taunted, dancing across the curses that were flying her way. When Mummy's gone the same manner as Freddy. 6 lethal growls ripped through the air, immediately drawing the witch's interest. She checked out my own family and her eyes widened slightly. Our small distraction threw Mrs. Weasley a window even though, in a voice that became a mixture of each sheer desperation and hate, she screamed, "You will never touch our kids once more." After which a flash of green light flew at Bellatrix, and earlier than she had time to boost her wand in defense, it hit her proper at the chest, without delay above her coronary heart, which stopped beating right now. She tumbled backwards in opposition to the ground. The thud of the autumn followed with the aid of a massive blissful roar from the onlooking crowd. Bella cheered too, as did my brothers and sisters. I, however, had my interest fixed at the mind of the invisible boy who becomes status among the victorious Mrs. Weasley and the livid Voldemort. Voldemort launched his anger in a manic scream, the force of his spell sending the 3 different duelers flying backwards through the air. Kingsley and Slughorn had been stored from a painful impact by using Flitwick, who twirled his wand fast, suspending their bodies before they might collide with the floor. McGonagall, but, flew in the contrary course. She would have smashed straight into the strong wall and acquired important accidents, simplest she changed into stored via my chivalrous, golden-haired brother, who reacted right now, pouncing into the air and rescuing her from the blow. Jasper placed her on her feet subsequent to Bela, inside the identical second that Harry fired a shield among Voldemort and Mrs. Weasley. All people looked around for the source of the sound, and Harry satisfied them by pulling off his cloak, exposing himself for his final battle. Screams and cheers of shock and jubilation exploded through the air because the hall reacted to Harry's go back. Their remedy wasn't my key interest, although I looked for Voldemort's thoughts, desperately tempted by using his mystery response. At the surface, he regarded calm, yet furious inside the same moment. Under it all, but, lay nothing but a whirlwind of overwhelming worry. Now not viable, dead, useless. I killed him. I destroyed him with the Elder Wand. He can be alive. It is an impossibility. But there he is. Alive. Alive whilst he need to be lifeless. I do not want all of us else to try to help, stated Harry, as he and Voldemort commenced to circle, their wands pointing immediately at one another. It is we're given to be like this. It is we're given to be me. Potter does not imply that, hissed Voldemort. That isn't always how he works, is it? Who are you going to use as a shield today, Potter? Nobody. Harry spoke back truly. There are no greater Horcruxes. It's just you and me. Neither can stay whilst the alternative survives, and one folks is ready to leave for suitable. How should he probably have acknowledged? How could Dumbledore have located my secrets and techniques? Secrets and techniques that I in no way confided to everybody. One people, you think it will be you, do you, the boy who has survived with the aid of accident, and due to the fact Dumbledore changed into pulling the strings. Externally, Voldemort conveyed no question in his potential to defeat Harry, underneath the facade, but, he became terrified of Harry's ability to cheat dying. He saw the boy as a few kind of phantom, person who might continue to be tied to the world of the living until he may want to sooner or later controlled to drag Voldemort lower back via the veil with him. In his eyes, Harry might also as well had been sporting a scythe and an hourglass, for he had mockingly and satirically emerged as the living reaper. Accident, become it, when my mother died to save me. Requested Harry. Coincidence, after I determined to combat in that graveyard. Accident, that I failed to protect myself tonight, and nevertheless survived, and returned to fight once more. I centered in on Harry's mind, and for one quick moment, I saw in photo that, in step with him, become of the vicinity that he had visited after being hit through the killing curse. It became a grand corridor with a glowing glass dome for a roof. There was an vintage man sat there, and he had a remarkable, white beard and wore 1-2 moon spectacles. If it hadn't been for the reality that I had seen the equal face inside the minds of others as they notion of the antique Hogwarts headmaster, I probably would have presumed that the man became God. He virtually regarded the component in my opinion. In fact, this whole component appeared freakishly close to the Christian tale, an omniscient being sending his protege to die to keep the sector from evil, certainly aware that the very identical boy could have the electricity to acquire his own resurrection. That changed into the pivotal moment, the one wherein my fear for Harry swelled into perception. Dumbledore had manifestly understood some of the innermost and oldest magic. If he had encouraged Harry's return, all understanding as he seemed, he need to have believed that his student honestly did have the electricity to quit Voldemort as soon as and for all. That turned into enough for me. Injuries, roared Voldemort. Accident and hazard, and the reality that you cowered and sniveled at the back of the skirts of more ladies and men, and authorized me to kill them for you. You might not be killing everyone else this night, responded Harry. You might not be capable of kill any of them ever once more. Do not you get it? I used to be prepared to die to prevent you hurting those humans. However, you did not. I supposed to, and that is what did it. I have carried out what my mother did. They may be covered from you. Haven't you observed how not one of the spells you placed on them are binding? You cannot torture them. You cannot contact them. You don't research from your errors, Riddle, do you? Voldemort's fear right away morphed right into a blaze of fury, outraged by using the Harry's use of his call, and even more enraged by way of the reality that he had accomplished so in the front of masses of witnesses. He detested something that associated him with the non-magical world and his father. I felt my eyes bulge as I found that he had murdered the person. You dare. Yes, I dare, interrupted Harry. I realize things you do not, Tom Riddle. I recognize lots of vital belongings you don't want to listen a number of them, earlier than you are making another huge mistake. Voldemort jeered, taunting his adversary with the reality that Dumbledore have been foolish enough to value love above the best magic. The fear surged through him over again as Harry informed him that he believed he possessed magic and a weapon greater effective than something belonging to Voldemort. The proclamation effectively launched the two into an issue concerning the Death Stick, wherein Harry revealed Dumbledore's final plan and the real nature of Severus Snape. Irrespective of notion, Voldemort, relieved that Harry's revelation turned into not anything extra than Snape's duplicity. Snape is lifeless. Whether he changed into running for Dumbledore or no longer is now beside the point. He's long past, and I am the master of the Elder Wand. Dumbledore became seeking to keep the wand from me, he cackled. He supposed that Snape must be the authentic grasp of the wand. But I were given there ahead of you, little boy. I reached the wand earlier than you could search out it. I understood the reality earlier than you caught up. I killed Severus Snape 3 hours in the past, and the Elder Wand, the Death Stick, the Wand of Future is clearly mine. Dumbledore's ultimate plan went incorrect, Harry Potter. Yeah, it did, stated Harry. You are right. But before you try to kill me, I might advocate you to think about what you've got performed, think, and attempt for a few remorse, Riddle. What is this? It is your one last danger, Harry persisted. It's all you have left. I've visible what you may be in any other case, his thoughts packed with the reminiscence of a flayed and bare toddler. It turned into laid at the ground of the limbo hall, whimpering in terror, its frame organized into the fetal roll. Be a man, strive for a few remorse. You dare. Sure, I dare, interrupted Harry, once more, due to the fact Dumbledore's final plan hasn't backfired on me at all. It's backfired on you, Riddle. That wand nevertheless isn't operating well for you, because you murdered the wrong man or woman. Severus Snape turned into in no way the genuine grasp of the Elder Wand. He never defeated Dumbledore. Voldemort tried to argue, but Harry cut him off in his determination to reveal him his best mistake. But he knowledgeable him that Dumbledore's plan might have left him unbeaten, for Snape might have been killing him beneath the headmaster's orders and, therefore, the electricity of the Elder Wand might have died with him. But I stole it towards Dumbledore's wishes. Its energy is mine now. Voldemort proceeded to voice his thoughts, which, in turn, sent a surge of frustration via his opponent. Failed to you concentrate to Ollivander. The wand chooses the wizard. The Elder Wand acknowledged a new master before Dumbledore died, a person who never even laid a hand on it. The brand new grasp removed the wand from Dumbledore against his will, by no means realizing exactly what he had completed, or that the arena's most dangerous wand had given him its allegiance. Lies. Snape killed Dumbledore. The others confirmed it. They witnessed the dying. The actual grasp of the Elder Wand turned into Draco Malfoy. 3 separate gasps reached my ears. One had come from Draco himself, whose mind have been in a whirl. I had expected to locate regret upon getting into his thoughts, however all I may want to discover have been utter shock and paralyzing fear. He remembered that he had disarmed his vintage headmaster, and knew that his movement could lead him to the same fate as Snape. The second gasp had come from the lady at his aspect, whose thoughts mirrored Draco's. Not my son. He will kill him for positive. He is going to kill my son. The 0.33 gasp had come from Hermione. Her eyes bulged and flew to the weapon in Harry's hand, then to the Slytherin boy, who became being clutched tightly by means of his desperate mom, and in the end lower back to the wand. He took it on the Malfoy manner. He mastered Draco's wand. And all at once Hermione turned into on the equal wavelength as Harry. She noticed where the conversation turned into going, as did I, my eyes snapping to the mahogany stick that Bela had won from the Death Eater. I looked in brief return at Hermione, whose eyes appeared to sparkle as she regarded on in the direction of the center of the corridor, her respiration accelerating with the force of her elation and desire, earlier than I shot my gaze lower back to the circling pair. However, what does it remember? Stated Voldemort softly. Even if you are proper, Potter, it makes no distinction to you and me. You not have the Phoenix Wand, we duel on talent alone, and after I have killed you, I can attend to Draco Malfoy. However, you are too past due, smiled Harry in response. You've missed your chance. I got there first. I overpowered Draco weeks ago. I took this wand from him. He twitched the wand, and Voldemort's heart immediately flew into double time, pumping madly, as if attempting to interrupt freed from its cage so that you can flee the threat it evidently sensed. He is terrified, notioned Jasper, who became gazing the snake man, his breath held as the concern and elation of the room affected his own feelings. For what I prayed will be the final time, I threw myself into Voldemort's thoughts. Jasper had been proper. The monster sensed his end. This cannot be. He can be its master. I can die. This can be my destiny. I have walked alongside the course of immortality. I will now not be defeated. I should now not be defeated. He have to be the only to die, no longer me. So it all comes right down to this, doesn't it? Whispered Harry, his wand gripped firmly, the instant of reality most effective seconds away. Does the wand for your hand understand its last grasp become disarmed? Due to the fact if it does, I am the proper master of the Elder Wand. All of a surprising, a purple gold ray from the growing sun burst throughout the room, bathing the outstanding hall in the colorations of Harry's House of Bela's saying the give up of Twilight and the start of a new day. The excessive, ferocious shriek of Voldemort filled the air in the identical second that Harry launched his very last cry of defense, both men seeming to burn inside the fiery light of the dawn. Avada Kedavra, Expelliarmus. Inexperienced and pink lightning flashed between them, meeting inside the middle with an exceptional bang because the spells collided in an explosion of flames. And then the colors flashed together within the critical second, lower back towards the man who had murdered such a lot of innocents, his retribution coming for him at remaining. His mind rang with one final scream inside the moment his flare modified root the instant that he knew that demise turned into unavoidable and had eventually stuck up with him. The jets each hit his chest within the equal 2D, the force of the magic sending Voldemort backwards via the air, because the Elder Wand flew from his hand and spun in the path of Harry, its rightful master, the man it refused to ruin, the only who had subsequently come to assert it, and with whom it have to be united. And as Voldemort fell backwards in the direction of the floor, the heart and mind of the tyrant silent at ultimate, Harry caught the wand in his outstretched hand, before his eyes fell again to the lifeless corpse of his defeated nemesis sprawled pathetically across the floor. There has been one brief second of quiet, both oral and verbal, because the room stared on dumbly at the dead frame of Voldemort. Then, in a torrent of bursting screams of shock and jubilation, the room crashed towards their hero, each single one in all of them fueled by a gratitude so effective that it couldn't possibly be expressed via any quantity of thank you. He did it, have been the phrases that assaulted me in those following couple of seconds. It is over. He did it. Harry, he killed him. He did it. The mental and spoken cheers have been deafening as they echoed across the hall. The best mind I was inquisitive about, however, changed into the one belonging to the girl that changed into flying at me. Bella raced into my fingers, her eyes overflowing with tears of joy and grief. I overwhelmed my lips to hers in a way that I very rarely tried. My own alleviation and happiness had been a ways too overwhelming. In a single second of insanity, I threw warning to the winds and kissed her in the way that a regular teenage boy could kiss the lady he cherished. I kissed her like my life depended on it. And here she again, her hands circling my neck as she swung her legs up and locked them around my waist, allowing me to aid her weight. I really like you, she laughed via her tears, as she pulled again to have a look at me. I love you too, I answered, knowing that there was no person truth more than that. After which Carlisle and Esme were going for walks at us. Carlisle patted me at the return while Esme scooped Bella up in a loving hug, intensely satisfied that the delicate girl she considered a daughter had survived the conflict. I stared about the room. Rosalie was wrapped round Emmett, the pair oblivious to the entirety going on around them as they engaged in an endless kiss. Alice and Jasper were also locked in an embody, but they have been looking into one another's eyes as a substitute, surprise and love seen on their faces. At the center of the extraordinary corridor, Ginny had thrown herself at Harry. He overwhelmed her frame to his and buried his face in her hair. Ron, in the meantime, became trapped in a hug together with his mom, though his eyes never left Hermione, who was being embraced by means of McGonagall. Ron's mother launched him within the equal moment that the instructor permit go of her pupil to wrap her hands round Professor Sprout. Now unfastened, Ron flew to Hermione and lifted her off the floor, swinging her around in his happiness. Her face, like Bela's, became streaked with tears, conquered by the extreme flood of emotion that Voldemort's defeat had stimulated. She laughed as she twirled through the air, her eyes by no means leaving Ron's face for the duration of the entire component, now not even after he diminished her to the ground. "So," she said, her smile touching her eyes, which sparkled with pleasure, 3 years once I punched Draco Malfoy." The blush crept onto Ron's cheeks, and his gaze flicked across the room to me for a brief second. "Cheers, mate, you genuinely positioned me in it." I laughed loudly and winked at him, right now, after which his eyes snapped lower back to Hermione. His posture straightened and he shrugged, as he tried to hide his embarrassment. "Well, it changed into the single sexiest second in history. Are you able to blame me?" Hermione giggled, and in the resulting seconds, she and Ron had been following the lead of the other couples scattering the room. Just earlier than Bela back into my ready fingers, she laughed loudly, the stunning sound sparking my interest. I observed her gaze to the one-two massive, Hagrid. He had scooped the tiny Professor Flitwick into his fingers, and changed into kissing him at the cheek. The instructor failed to protest, whilst Hagrid's fat, speedy falling tears spilled onto his garments. Alternatively, he cheered and flashed his wand, causing a circulate of golden bubbles to cascade into the air. Then, he grabbed Hagrid's face, and landed a kiss on the giant's cheek and go back. I laughed, before returning my attention to my Bela, the most impossible to resist lady inside the International. Although the swell of emotion following Harry's triumph did not fade throughout the course of the day, the initial joy lessened as the families and friends of those who had died in the final battle were finally able to turn their attention to mourning. Fred's death, in particular, caused waves of heartache to surge through the school. He had obviously been very popular amongst the students and teachers. It wasn't difficult to understand why he had a talent for making people laugh. Even I, in the few hours that I had known him, hadn't been able to suppress the smiles as he joked with his brother at Bela's expense. The knowledge that she had formed a close friendship with the Weasley twins made it all the more excruciating. I couldn't stand to see Bela in pain. It felt as if I was being torn apart from the inside out. Carlisle, unable to prevent decades of medical practice from kicking in, suggested that we should return to Forks in order to allow Bela some rest. I was inclined to agree with him. She looked exhausted, which was only to be expected, considering the circumstances. She refused, however, determined, as she was, to talk with those who had remained behind to fight. There's a sense of belonging here for her, Edward, Jasper thought as he watched her embrace Katie Bell and Angelina Johnson, both of who wore the same glimmering trails on their cheeks as Bela. These people can relate far better than we are able. She needs to be here, for a few more hours, at least. I nodded. Jasper was right. The first stages of mourning would be better spent in the company of those with whom she shared a mutual grief. We walked with her as she moved throughout the hall, making her way from one friend to another. "Jasper," she said, after she had finished her exchange with Lee Jordan, "would you mind helping me out a little, please? It's all getting a little." Her voice broke on the last word as her breathing began to hitch. "Of course," he replied, softly, his eyes kind. A wall of calm exploded outwards, the effects immediate as it crashed upon Bela. She inhaled deeply then, her eyes squeezed shut as she did so, before she flicked them open and directed a meek smile at my empathic brother. "Thank you. You're welcome, Bela," he said, satisfied with the awareness that he was actually useful in this kind of situation. I felt envy bubble in my gut. A crease appeared between Jasper's eyes as he tasted my mood, his head tilting slightly to the side in question. "I just feel useless," I mumbled at a level Bela wouldn't be able to hear. "Oh," he thought, his brow unfurrowing immediately. "You're not the only one, Edward." His eyes flashed to Alice, whose expression revealed every ounce of the torment she experienced as she watched her best friend. Jasper won't be there to give her a reprieve every time she needs it. What then? Hasn't Bela already had enough to deal with? Now this. No one should have to watch their friends die. If it had been Bela instead, I don't think that even Jasper would have the power to dull that level of sorrow. I recoiled from my sister's mind. That was one subject I could not bear to think about. Bela had survived. She had made it through the battle because she was a fierce fighter and an accomplished witch. Dwelling on thoughts of what could have happened was both painful and unnecessary. We headed over towards Neville and Luna, who were sat amongst a crowd of students, though they were accompanied by an old lady in peculiar dress. There was the strong smell of mothballs circulating her, and in her hand, she gripped a large pointed hat, on the side of which sat a stuffed vulture. Surely the smug woman hadn't been wearing that during the battle. In fact, what was an individual of her age doing here anyway? I quickly searched back through my memories, and almost laughed out loud at the image that filled my head. I had seen this same woman transform a man into a squirrel, after which she had proceeded to swing it around over her head like a lasso, before releasing the rodent and sending it flying in an Emmett and Jasper-like fashion. How very odd. Ah, she said, noticing our arrival, so these must be the vampires I've been hearing about. She lifted her glasses to her eyes, which were tied to a cord hanging about her neck, and peered through the lenses at each of us individually. Similar colored eyes as my cat, she mused, her face only inches from Emmett's. Not a very frightening looking bunch, this lot. My eyes popped. This was getting ridiculous. We couldn't even scare an elderly woman now. We really were losing our touch. The woman's eyes traveled to our hands, which remained laced with our patners. Yes, far too lovey-dovey for vampires. And their clothes, the older male is wearing a baby blue tie for Merlin's sake. Not scary in the slightest. What was she expecting? Capes. Never mind, never mind. Wardrobe is not important. Better not tell that to Alice. My grandson, she said, proudly waving a hand to indicate Neville, and his friend, Miss Lovegood, have informed me of your contribution to the war effort. It would seem that we witches and wizards owe you a great debt. I am sure you would have won, replied Carlyle politely, regardless of our involvement. Don't be so modest. How many parents and grandparents owe you their children's lives? I saw you throw yourself as a shield earlier, Mr. Cullen. Mr. Cullen, she said, her eyes still on my father. Our numbers could have severely depleted if you had not decided to come to Hogwarts. We still may have gained the overall victory, but at what cost? Well, we're just happy that we could help, smiled Esme. Indeed, answered Neville's grandmother, her eyes traveling over our group again, finally coming to rest on my hand, which was still weaved through Bela's. You are not like other vampires. Anyone could see that. I am very grateful for it. She smiled at each of us then, before heading off in the direction of Professor McGonagall. Don't mind her, Neville laughed. She's a tough old bird, but she's all right really. How are you feeling, Bela? Luna asked, her voice heavy with concern. No differently from everyone else, I guess, answered Bela. Luna nodded, and took Bela's hand. We'll see them again. They're only on the other side of the veil. The veil? I questioned, remembering that Voldemort had used the same term in his thoughts after Harry had made his reappearance. I've heard that before. What does it mean? Has Bela told you about the Ministry? Luna said. Yes, briefly. Well, there is a place there called the Department of Mysteries. We went there in 5th year to stop Voldemort from getting his hands on a prophecy. There is a great circular room, and at its center lies an arch, from which hangs a veil. Looking at it, you'd think that to walk through it would just mean that you'd come out on the other side. That's not exactly the case though. The arch is a gateway into death. What? Gasped Rosalie. Luna's right, Bela whispered. In the old days, the arch was used for executions. It was considered the most humane way of killing. All a person has to do is walk through it, and they die. Their body doesn't fall out on the other side. They just disappear, and no one ever came back, once they passed through. Asked Carlyle, who was riveted to the conversation. No one can return to the world of the living once they've truly passed into death, said Bela, shaking her head. I wasn't so sure about that. I still hadn't told her of the resurrection stone. I hadn't even fully discussed with her the impossible incident that happened in the Forbidden Forest. I desperately wanted to ask Harry about that. I had felt his mind disappear after Voldemort had fired the curse, and I had seen the memories of his time in limbo if that was what it was, but my knowledge was limited. I wanted the details. I needed to understand. You heard the voices, too, Bela, Luna urged. Voices, I said. The ones calling from beneath the veil, Bela explained quietly. You see, continued Luna. Don't think of it as goodbye, just, see you later. Even if you do decide to prolong your time here, everything has to pass through at some point, even vampires. I didn't register the fact that I was gawking until Luna walked away down the length of the hall. Although a little confusing, she was undoubtedly insightful. I had always believed that an afterlife existed for the humans. I had never been able to accept that the world was the result of some colossal accident, that there was no more to life than flukes and evolution. I was becoming entirely more certain that my initial beliefs were right as time went on. There was something more, something that came next. Despite that, I couldn't accept that heaven was possible for my kind. I had seen the effects my venom had on the Horcrux. It had successfully destroyed a piece of Voldemort's soul. Without a soul, what part was there left that could allow us entry? My head felt heavy, even as Luna's voice called from across the hall. As she shouted out something about a blibbering humdinger, I couldn't find it in me to crack a smile. I saw your little trick with the snake, Bela, said Neville. That was great. The Death Eater looked terrified. Speaking of snakes, she answered, what you did with Nagini was incredible, Neville. If someone had told me in first year that you were going to become such a hero, I never would have believed them. You were so dopey, shy, and quiet, smiled Bela. Look at you now. Ah, gosh, Bela, Neville blushed. Everyone who fought did amazing. It was a team effort. May I have a look at your sword, Neville? Carlyle asked, unable to hold his fascination. Sure, take a seat. My family each took a place at the long table, the other students scooting over to make room for them. Bela, however, remained standing, her head turned towards the huge doors leading out into the entrance hall, through which Ron and Hermione were walking. Edward, she said tiredly, I think I am going to go have a human moment. I need to clean up. Do you want to go back? No, not just yet. She gave a faint smile, and then moved to kiss me on the cheek. I'll be back in a little while. I nodded, and watched her turn and walk towards the exit. In the mood that I had fallen into, hearing about the Sword of Gryffindor posed no interest for me. I needed somewhere quiet to think about whether or not I was willing to risk Bela's soul, now that I had learned what I had. Before that, though, I would require all the information that Harry could give me about the place beyond. I searched for his mind, immediately realizing that he was with Ron and Hermione, beneath his invisibility cloak. He was revealing to them everything that he had seen in the Pensieve. So, that was Snape in the forest? Ron asked. Yes, he'd been working for Dumbledore the entire time, and we never knew it. Harry then moved on to explaining how he had been the last Horcrux, before telling them about his walk to meet Voldemort. He refrained from mentioning me, for which I was grateful. Finally, he came to the section of his tale which involved the Limbo Hall. I listened, completely engrossed in his words and mental picturing. I imagine he'll be forced to exist in that state for the rest of eternity, said Harry. Dumbledore himself said that Voldemort's soul was beyond anyone's help. He then moved on to telling them about the connection that had developed between his and Voldemort's wand, and then on to the subject of the Deathly Hallows. I learnt that there was some connection between the Resurrection Stone, the Elder Wand, and the Invisibility Cloak, and that it was the dream of many to unite them. Dumbledore, too, had obsessed over the idea, apparently, but, as of yet, only Harry had been able to do so, because he used them selflessly, whereas others would use them for personal gain. So, there really is something after? Ron asked, his thoughts flying to Fred, instantly registering the stabbing pain which seemed to pierce him. Yes, and how is it that you were able to come back? Said Hermione, utterly fascinated and thirsty for information. When Voldemort took my blood, he absorbed my mother's protection. Whilst he lived, the magic tethered me to life in the same way that a Horcrux would. Incredible, Hermione exclaimed. They arrived at the head's office then, and were met by an unbelievable applause as they walked through the doors. When the portraits had settled down, Harry addressed the white-bearded man in the largest frame, directly behind the ornate desk. The thing that was hidden in the snitch, I dropped it in the forest. I don't know exactly where, but I am not going to go looking for it again. Do you agree, my dear boy? I do, said Dumbledore through his happy tears. A wise and courageous decision, but no less than I would have expected of you. Does anyone else know where it fell? No one, said Harry, deceptively, not wanting to mention my name in front of Ron and Hermione. Edward could know. Would he be tempted to go looking for it? I should talk to him, just in case. And, suddenly, I was striding through the entrance hall, shooting into the courtyard, and breaking into a sprint. My feet barely touched the floor as I flew past the wooden hut and into the sinister forest. There were no signs of the Dementors now. They had fled after Voldemort's recent defeat. The sound of hundreds of hooves beating against the ground could be heard from somewhere far off as I streaked through the shadows. Locating the clearing took neither time nor effort. Even without my perfect memory, Harry's scent was strong, surrounded by dozens of others which were leading in the same direction. I followed the trail to the very spot where he had uncloaked himself, identifying the resurrection stone amongst the dirt, twigs, and crispy leaves immediately. I reached down to pick it up. It seemed so regular, nothing particularly extraordinary, yet it was. I had already beheld its power once. I desperately wanted it again, and was sorely tempted. Still, I was well aware that it was extremely wrong to disturb the dead. Harry knew it, too, hence the reason why he wished to speak with me. But if it was just this once, this one time, surely it couldn't hurt, just this once, and then never again. The stone twirled 3 times in my fingers, my eyelids pressed firmly shut as fear and elation exploded through my veins. At first, I thought that it had been unsuccessful. I heard no sound to indicate that someone was standing nearby, but then, from across some thick, mysterious barrier, I felt a burst of positive emotion of absolute, unending love. Edward, came a voice. I gasped in a quick breath, my eyes snapping open in the very same moment. And there she stood, her thick, bronze hair falling in gentle waves to her waist, over the high-necked, emerald dress I remembered her wearing so frequently around the house. Elizabeth Masson, my mother. Even if I had known exactly what I had wanted to say, I wouldn't have been able to get the words out. My body felt like every bit the statue that it should have been, my tongue remaining completely frozen as I gazed at the woman across from me. She moved forwards towards me until only inches separated us, before her hand rose through the air to touch my cheek. I swallowed. Her hand felt neither warm nor cold, nor did it feel completely substantial. Tenderness and wonder overtook her countenance as she made the gesture, and I swiftly felt my own expression begin to mirror the one which filled my eyes. "My boy," she cooed, "my beautiful boy." Mom," I said in a whisper, unable to believe that this was really happening. "Mother," she nodded quickly, her face breaking into an incredible smile. My arms rose of their own accord to grip her lightly, whilst my eyes traveled over her face, cementing every shade and angle into my memory. "How is this even possible?" I murmured, realizing that maintaining a steady voice would have been beyond me if I had decided to speak with more volume. "Is this real? Does it feel real? Does it feel right?" I nodded. "Then it is," she said simply. "How it is possible doesn't really matter. You need to stop overthinking things, my darling. I miss you," I said sincerely. There were so many things I wanted to say, so many things I wanted to ask, but everything seemed to be getting stuck in my throat. "We were ill, I didn't get to say goodbye." She inhaled deeply, before the smile reappeared on her face. Then her hand dropped to my arm as she wound hers through mine. "Walk with me," she said, her turquoise eyes never leaving my face. I, too, was having problems averting my gaze. In the end, I decided it was pointless to try and, instead, watched where I was going through my peripheral vision. When the epidemic reached us, Edward, I knew perfectly well that there was no hope for me. I knew that I would die. That part wasn't difficult to accept. I was never afraid for myself. What did terrify me, the thing I truly couldn't bear to think of, was the idea that death would come for you as well. You were so young and lovely, and there were still a world of things that you hadn't experienced. I prayed and prayed that you'd survive, that you'd be given the chance to live a full and happy life. Did you know? I asked suddenly. Did you know what he was, Carlisle, what I'd become when he chose to save me? After a short pause, she said finally, "No, I didn't. I think I was delusional in the late stages. I thought that Dr. Cullen was an angel, or something similar. I am sure you can understand why that occurred to me. You were all incredibly beautiful, after all." I smiled, but I knew it would look bleak. I didn't know what he was, my mother continued, but I knew that he wasn't normal. I knew that there was something very different about him, but I also knew that he was a very good man. I wanted that for you to be healthy, and to have the opportunity to grow into a good, compassionate individual like him. I sensed that it was in his power to give you that, and so I made my plea. My stomach clenched. She had thought that Carlyle's actions would allow me the chance to grow into a good man. I'd actually transformed into a murderer. I've done bad things, I whispered. My breathing was becoming erratic. If I had been human, tears would have been spilling down my face, not because of the guilt I felt over my past, but because I couldn't bear the idea that I had let my mother down, and the enduring disappointment and distress my decisions would provoke. I waited for the surge of anger and pain, certain beyond anything that it was inevitable, but it never came. All I felt was love, giant and unconditional, reaching to me from some far-off place. I felt like I had temporarily borrowed Jasper's power. You lost your way, my dear, my mother smiled, coming to a stop and looking directly into my eyes. Not even that. You did what came natural to you. You accepted your nature and followed it. This was it. The disappointment was coming. I braced myself for it, my eyes falling to the ground in shame. I am so incredibly proud of you. My head snapped up at inhuman speed as I gawked openly at the woman in front of me. How could she say that? Didn't she know? Didn't she know that every time I was with a human, thoughts of bloody murder permeated my mind? Edward, she said seriously, you are a vampire. Every instinct you have tells you to kill those who should serve in sustaining you. But you don't. You battle your impulses every single day in your efforts to be a good person, a good man. My darling, that is what defines who you are today. What more could a mother hope for? I immediately threw my arms around her and buried my face in her hair. She laughed and placed her arms around my neck, stroking the back of my head. I couldn't believe that this was happening. After over 80 years of being without her, I finally had her back. She was there and she loved me, and it felt absolutely wonderful. When she finally pulled back, her face held a radiant smile and her eyes sparkled. So, tell me about this girl of yours, she said happily, sliding her arm back through mine as we began our walk again. Bela, I breathed, pronouncing her name as if it were a caress, is the most beautiful girl in the history of the universe. She is completely selfless, unbelievably brave, intelligent, and more loving than you can possibly imagine. She sounds wonderful. She is. I smiled, launching into the tale of how we had come together. It occurred to me that she already knew everything already, but I wanted her to hear it from me in any case. I told her of how Bela's blood had sang to me, and how I had battled desperately in my efforts to keep her alive. I told her of how she had seen past all my faults, refusing to be deterred by the fact that we didn't belong to the same species. I told her of James, and how she had almost brought about her own death in her determination to save her mother. Then I informed her of how I had deserted Bela in my attempt to preserve her soul. She listened until my story reached the present, never interrupting once. She's beautiful inside and out. She makes me feel complete, like I've finally found the last piece of the jigsaw. I may have had to wait 100 years for her, but that seems a small price in comparison to what I am getting in return. Ah yes, said my mother, you are going to make her like you. I felt my grin disappear as my mother searched my face. I shouldn't I whispered, not after what I've learnt. I shouldn't be so selfish, but I already know that I wouldn't be able to bear living without her. And if I refuse her now, Carlyle will change her Edward, she said, cutting me off, from what you've told me, Bela is a smart girl. I think that it's time that you began to trust in her ability to decide her own future wisely. She's a witch. She understands more than you think. What do you mean? That is for her to say, she smiled. The trees were thinning now, the edge of the forest was nearing. My mother stopped in her tracks, her arm uncurling from mine. I have to let you go, don't I said, a terrible pain overwhelming me at the mere thought of it. I can leave unless you allow me to, but we both know that I don't belong here. I don't want to say goodbye, I uttered. I can bear the idea of never seeing you again. I don't want to say goodbye either, she replied kindly, but I don't think it's a case of that. Everyone dies, Edward. She lifted her hand to stroke my face again, her eyes serious as she looked at me. Not even vampires can stay on one side of the veil forever. One day you'll pass under it too. Hopefully, you'll be hand in hand with your love when you do. But it will happen, make no mistake, and when it does, I'll be there to welcome you. I tried to smile but failed. If I thought I had a soul to ensure that that were possible, I'd believe you. Well, then, it is a good thing you have found Bela. Perhaps you will learn something. In the next second, she had opened her arms again for me, and I was in them, hugging her tightly, communicating as clearly as I could every ounce of love I felt for the woman who had raised me. I love you, Mom, I vowed. And I love you, my Edward, she replied, the smile in her voice as plain as day. Nothing will ever change that. I don't regret asking Dr. Cullen to change you. I could never have had you miss out on a wonder like Bela. My only regret is that I haven't been able to meet her, and that I won't be there when you remarried. I wish you could be. She reached up on her tiptoes to kiss me on the forehead. You'll be wonderful. I can just imagine it. She pulled out of my arms and I reluctantly let her go. Take care of my future daughter-in-law, she laughed. I will, I promised. I gave her your ring. Her face broke into a dazzling smile. She looked ecstatic. That's perfect. Did she like it? She loved it, I said. Bela likes old-fashioned things, which is good. We re the same in that respect. Well, I wish you both all the best, and all my love. Thank you, Mom, goodbye. For now, she nodded. Then, before I could change I dropped the resurrection stone from my hand, and released her from the world of the living. Immediately, the pain of losing her yet again clenched around my heart like a vice. I wanted nothing more than to pick the stone up and call her back, but I knew that that was unacceptable. She was where she belonged in heaven, the exact place she deserved to be. In one swift movement, I brought my foot up, and sent it crashing down upon the tiny, black object, the force of the blow causing an almighty bang to thunder through the air. When I stepped back from the dent I had just created, I saw that the resurrection stone had been transformed into a sparkling black powder, which swirled into the air as a breeze swept the forest floor. I took a deep, steadying breath as I replayed everything that had happened in the last 15 minutes. It seemed so unfair that I had had to let her go after my time with her had been so short, but, if I was being honest, never would I have believed that I would be allowed such a gift in the first place. I had seen and spoken with my mother, Elizabeth Masson, for the first time in 80 years, and in doing so I had learnt that her soul was safe, even if it was separated from me. I needed to be more like Harry to be less greedy. My mom wanted me to be a good person, being grateful for what I had been given, instead of wishing for more, was the best place to start. I launched myself out of the forest and back towards the castle, where I knew that Bela would be waiting for me. She was sat with the others when I entered the great hall. The dirt and blood no longer smeared her skin or matted her hair, and although she was wearing the same jeans and t-shirt as she had during the battle, they were completely spotless. Even the cuts and bruises which she had gained during the night had vanished. "Where were you?" she asked concernedly as I approached. "I went for a walk," I answered, preferring not to disclose the truth in front of my family. I wasn't sure why, but I felt extremely uncomfortable about the idea of revealing something so private. I would tell Bela, of course, but not until I was positive we were alone. I searched for Jasper's mind, and saw that my words had provoked a rush of worry in Bela. She probably assumed that I had fallen back into my usual depression, after the initial joy of victory had diminished. In truth, I was too confused at the moment to even know for myself exactly what I was feeling. There were far too many emotions to be able to sort my mood into one category. I was overjoyed that I had seen my mother again, distraught that I had had to let her go, relieved that Bela had survived the battle, guilty because I was still considering turning her into a vampire, along with 100 other things that were entirely too complicated to explain. "Bela, would you mind if we—" "Edward," she said urgently, her expression serious as she looked at me, "I have a feeling I know what's been going through your head in the last couple of hours. And before you voice your thoughts on that subject, would you mind if I show you something?" Her words confused me. I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. I agreed, regardless, allowing her to lace her fingers through mine. You should all come, too, she said, addressing my family. This concerns you as well. Despite her cryptic statement, my family rose from their seats and followed as she led us from the Great Hall. Do you know where Professor McGonagall is, Edward? She questioned. She's on the 5th floor corridor with Flitwick. They repairing the castle. She nodded as we began our climb up the grand staircase, stopping on the floor I had indicated and walking through the door into the long corridor where, towards the end of it, stood the two professors. Their wands rested at their sides, whilst they gazed around in satisfaction as the rubble and glass that had been blasted onto the floor floated upwards to reform the walls and windows. Right, Minerva, that's this one done. Onto the 4th floor? Asked the tiny Professor Flitwick. Yes, Phileas, the sooner we finish the better. They turned and began walking in our direction. Flitwick smiled upon seeing us, but Professor McGonagall's face remained stern. She looked exhausted, and in the aftermath of the battle, when she too was left with a mountain of grief, it was far too early for her to attempt smiles and false happiness. Professor McGonagall. Yes, Miss Swan, I am in urgent need of a pensieve, but unfortunately I don't own one. Is there one belonging to the school that I would be able to use? There is one in the headmaster's office, she stated. Bela is trustworthy. She's proven herself beyond measure. So have her friends, too, according to Harry. The password is Longbottom. It has only just been changed. Potter was a little obvious. Yes, Bela agreed, but the first was still a good choice. Thank you, Professor. Bela turned to walk away, only to be stopped as she took the first step. Miss Swan, Professor, she said, spinning to face the tired-looking woman. McGonagall stared into her face, her complete attention focused on the girl beside me. Then, with a speed that I wouldn't have expected from a woman of her age, the professor flew to Bela and pulled her into an embrace, her eyes welling with tears as she did so. Bela wrapped her arms around the teacher's back, returning the sensitive gesture. Never, she whispered, has a professor of this school been as proud I am to be the head of Gryffindor House. I felt a swell of affection for Minerva McGonagall. Despite her stern image, she cared for her students deeply, as a teacher should. Bela remained speechless, and simply hugged the professor tighter, before both pulled back to look at one another. The professor's gaze then flitted to my family and I. Like the others, she demonstrated no concern or fear at the fact that she stood in the presence of 7 deadly vampires, nor did Flitwick. Thank you, all of you. We will not forget, she said simply, her eyes full of sincerity. Perhaps it was the briefness of her words, the fact that she was to the point in her portrayal of gratitude, and did not embellish with lengthy praises, that made her thanks all the more meaningful. You're welcome, I answered on behalf of myself and my family, as McGonagall's eyes settled on me. From the moment we walked through the door, your students treated us no differently than they do each other. Not one of them judged us based on what we are. Nor should they, said Flitwick. If Voldemort has taught us one thing, it is that it is better to judge based on merit, rather than species. Thank you, said Carlyle. You have no idea what that means to us. Professor Flitwick smiled respectfully as we all turned and made our way back out onto the grand staircase. We walked up the levels until we reached the 7th floor. As we turned into the corridor, which now looked exactly as it had prior to the battle, Emmett addressed Bela, posing a question which had been on his mind all morning. I don't understand. Your people obviously knew about the existence of vampires. If Voldemort's ambition was to achieve immortality, why didn't he just seek to become like us? He would have considered that course of action as something beneath him. Why would Voldemort have taken a route that hundreds of people have walked down before? It would have granted him immortality, but only until he got on the wrong side of another vampire. Besides, to people like him, anything that falls outside the classification of a pureblood witch or wizard is inferior. To them, Emmett, you are a half-breed. They consider you just as much an animal as they do me. His eyebrows shot up, but then a smile spread across his face. To be honest, Bela, I'd rather be part of the zoo crew. At least we didn't get our asses whooped. Bela laughed in response, smiling at Emmett as we reached the stone gargoyle blocking the entrance to the office. Password, it asked. Longbottom, Alice shouted giddily, excited by the mystery of the castle. The gargoyle stepped aside, allowing us to step onto the circular staircase, which began to wind upwards like some kind of stone escalator. "I love this place," Emmett uttered as his eyes caught the portraits lining the walls. The people had fallen quiet upon our arrival, some of them intrigued by our appearance, others wary. "Bum ba ba dee dum tweak tweak, bum bum dee doo," sang Dumbledore, breaking the silence. Emmett chuckled, evidently amused. "Catchy tune," he smirked. "I am glad you think so, my boy," replied the old headmaster. "Now that the world is safe again, I finally have time to practice my singing technique. A very amusing pastime, I think you'll find." Emmett smiled widely, but was distracted in the following seconds as Bela retrieved the pensieve from its place in the opened cabinet, carrying it across the room and placing it on the desk. Next, she lifted her wand to her head, her eyes finding mine as she drew the tip away, pulling with it a shining silvery strand, which she cast into the liquid. "What was that?" asked Jasper, his eyes fixed to the surface. "A memory," answered Bela, her eyes on me still. "One which you all need to see. Edward." I stepped forward slowly, my vision never leaving her face. "Why don't you go first?" I nodded, immediately lowering my face into the water, unafraid as the pensieve pulled me in and I began falling into Bela's memory. The first thing I saw as my feet hit the ground was Bela sprawled out behind me, behind her memory of me. This was weird. The others appeared at my side, one after another, in the next moments, and we all watched astounded as Bela single-handedly dealt with a giant, blasting a burst of fire at his hand. "I don't understand," said Carlyle, his eyes fixed to the back of my head. "Why didn't you help her, Edward? What were you?" "Bela," the memory me whispered, effectively cutting my father off. "I feel cold." I knew what was coming next, and I dreaded it. Sure enough, in the issuing seconds, a terrifying, cloaked creature crashed through a hole in the wall and directly into me, forcing me backward until my body was pressed against the hard stone. It immediately began feeding, whilst I desperately kicked and thrashed against it, unable to free myself as the despair took hold. "Edward," Esme panicked. "Edward, what's happening?" "It's all right," Bela assured her. "Remember, this is just a memory. They can't hurt us now." She and the others fell into silence, though their expressions never lost the fear and revulsion that had been there since the Dementor had first made its appearance. "This is unbearable," thought Esme as two more flew into the corridor. "What are those things?" Rosalie wondered, overwhelmed by disgust. "Why can't Edward fight them off?" Emmett panicked mentally, horrified by the idea that there was something in the world with the ability to overpower vampires. "What are they doing to him? He looks like he's in pain." He had no idea. The mere memory of that experience was almost too much. Suddenly, a man in Death Eater robes ran past our group towards Bela, who had just pulled herself to her feet and was aiming her wand at the Dementors. Before she had chance to conjure her Patronus, however, the enemy cracked a fist into the side of her head. A feral snarl erupted up my throat in my fury, and before I could stop myself, I had thrown myself at the Death Eater, my teeth bared in preparation. Of course, they never even made contact, because I flew straight through him as if he were nothing more than a hologram. "Would you just wait a moment, Edward?" Bela said calmly, unconcerned as the man aimed a punch to memory Bela's gut. I returned to her side in a flash, my teeth clenched together as I seethed in anger. Suddenly, the man grasped Bela's outstretching arms and roughly yanked them behind her back, holding her in place as he whispered in her ear. "I am going to make you watch, and then I am going to kill you." I heard her whimpering cries, which were echoed by mine as I stopped resisting the demons and began drowning with the complete loss of hope. The sight was terrible, my face looked tortured, and the sounds spewing from my mouth reflected the intensity of the torment the Dementors were inflicting upon me. Then, as the middle creature reached up and began pulling back its hood to reveal its horrifying face, if it could really be called that, Bela screamed out my name in terror and desperation, thrusting her foot backwards as she aimed her boot directly between the man's legs. He buckled the second her foot connected, falling to the floor and moaning in agony, whilst Bela dived forwards and grabbed her wand, before screaming out a spell and sending the Death Eater flying through the giant hole. "Expecto Patronum," she screamed, the silvery lion shooting from her wand and crashing against the Dementors, which went flying down the corridor as they attempted to flee the projection of positivity. My eyes flashed to my slumped body as a burning light caught my eyes. At first I thought that a piece of the Patronus had broken away from the hole after it had collided with the demonic creatures. Then my eyes caught my face, which looked on vacantly into nothing, my mouth hanging open moronically, above which floated the brilliant tiny orb of blinding white light. Suddenly, as the first flicker of understanding sparked within me, the bottom of my stomach seemed to disappear, and I lost all ability to move. Impossible. If I had been human, my heart would suddenly have been breaking into a sprint. If I had been human, my heart would have been beating so fast that I would have been in danger of a coronary. Completely, totally, utterly impossible. Is that unbelievable? Impossible. So beautiful, his soul. I hadn't dared to hope until I heard the word filling Carlyle's mind. The second I did, however, the one tiny fiber of belief seemed to ignite and explode through my body with the force of a bomb. The orb descended towards my hanging mouth, disappearing from view in the next instant. The second it was no longer visible, my eyes regained their life and I drew a deep, sudden breath. "Bela," I said worriedly, alerted by the scent of fresh blood, "you bleeding." And the next thing I knew, the 8 of us were rising upwards out of the pensieve, arriving back in the office which we had never really left. I stared at the swirling water as Bela retrieved the memory, knowing that if I were to look at my face through another's eyes, it would be blank with shock. Like me, the others were speechless, though their minds remained quite the opposite, loud in their desire for answers. "A Patronus," explained Bela, as she returned the pensieve to its rightful place, "is the manifestation of every positive emotion that a person has. The reason mine is a lion, as I've already told you, is partly due to the fact that I associate that image with you, Edward. You feed every good feeling I have. If you were to disappear from my life, I'd be a sitting duck in the event of a Dementor attack. The way a Patronus works is by replacing the victim's actual emotions with itself, thereby blocking the person from despair as the Dementor feeds, but you have to be able to fill your thoughts with something incredibly happy for it to work." Bela closed the cabinet and spun to face us, her face thoughtful as she regarded me. "Dementors are demons of despair. They nourish themselves by sucking the happiness from an individual, leaving their victim void of hope and good feelings. The absence of positive emotion can force the person to relive the worst moments of their life, and although they target anyone near to them at the time, they usually attracted to those more vulnerable to their influence, people with miserable and painful memories. If given the chance, a Dementor will feed off you until you become something similar." She paused, seeming to take a deep breath as she slowly crossed the room to stand in front of me. "Their most terrifying weapon is called the Dementor's kiss. To undergo it is a fate worse than death. In the Muggle world, people who've been subjected to it are said to suffer from PVS. Permanent vegetative state, thought Carlyle. When a Dementor performs the kiss, it lifts back its hood and sucks out your soul. That was it. The moment the belief completely crashed over me. It was out. She said it, and I could feel my throat tightening as the emotion surged through each sinew of tissue. I clenched my jaw to keep myself from gasping loudly. "So, you see, I know you have won, Edward," she said seriously, her eyes never leaving mine as her palm pressed against my chest. "I know it's there, because I've seen it with my own 2 eyes, and now you have too." I couldn't find words great enough in the next seconds that could adequately portray the way I suddenly felt. I felt that if a Dementor was to fly at me, then I'd be radiating enough hope, belief, love and outright joy that they wouldn't be able to break through to the deeper, darker places. They'd have to spend an eternity chiseling away at the solid wall of unending happiness that surrounded me like a force field. In that moment, I was a blazing beacon of every positive emotion because, despite everything, I had seen the ocular proof, as had my family. I had a soul. I had a soul. I threw myself at Bela in the next moment, the force of my happiness projecting into my muscles and sending us flying to the floor. I landed on top of her, forgetting completely that we were surrounded by the watching eyes of my family, and kissed her like we were the only 2 people left in the world. She kissed me back, and I totally and utterly lost myself in it. It was only when the sound of a giant applause erupted through the room that I realized what I was doing. I kissing the love of my life, my soulmate, in a very compromising position, on the floor, in front of everyone. My head snapped back to look over my shoulder. I had expected to see my family looking down at me, their eyebrows raised in amusement. Luckily, however, they were a little preoccupied, all of them searching for the souls of their partner as they gazed into each other's eyes. I stood up, pulling Bela back to her feet as I did so. She giggled uncontrollably whilst the people in the paintings cheered and wolf whistled, some waving their wigs above their heads, whilst others simply contented themselves with clapping. Above the noise, I heard one man, whose plate named him as Phineas Nigelis, grumble that Bela had I were guilty of defiling the office floor. Fortunately, I was too happy to care. That was interesting, Bela smirked, though a little flustered. I am sorry I attacked you, I answered, unable to keep the smile from my face. I am not, she smiled. I went to kiss her again, but a cough from the grumpiest portrait stopped me. Explain something to me, I said instead. Yes, why is it that my venom was able to destroy Voldemort's soul, yet mine is still there, even though the same substance passed through every cell of my body all those years ago? Honestly, I don't know enough about Horcruxes to be able to answer that for you. Other hand, called Dumbledore, who was sat twiddling his thumbs, a wide smile etched along his face, do. We all turned to him, then, eager to have the mystery solved. When a human being dies, or their body is injured in some way, their soul is left undamaged, safe in its entirety. The piece of soul within a Horcrux, however, relies completely on the object protecting it. Destroy the object, and you effectively destroy the fragment of soul. So, although vampire venom does not destroy an intact soul residing inside a human body, the fact that it is an extremely dangerous substance without cure means that the Horcrux cannot possibly repair itself. That, my boy, is the reason why your soul remains safe, whereas Voldemort's was destroyed. Understand? Yes, I think so, I nodded. What about splitting souls? Asked Jasper. I've killed. My heart sank. I'd murdered countless people, too. How many times had I maimed my soul? Ah, yes, that is a nasty subject. Edward, said Dumbledore, surprising me with the use of my name, when you saw your soul in the pensieve, did it appear broken into 2 or more pieces? There was only 1 orb, I answered confusedly. Well, then, your soul is whole. I don't understand, I admitted. I thought that killing split souls. It does, said Dumbledore, his face thoughtful. Killing is unnatural, and therefore forces the soul to split. However, I am fairly certain that if Miss Swan were to go and hunt down a nice plump turkey, her soul would remain intact even after she killed it. So, you saying that Edward's soul is safe, Carlyle clarified, because hunting humans for a vampire is the equivalent of a human killing a turkey. Absolutely, said Dumbledore. Do you think a lion would be sent to hell because it chose to eat a gazelle for breakfast? Of course not. Humans are a vampire's natural food source. It is nothing more than nature in action. Please don't misunderstand me, he went on. I am not inferring that you are silly in your decision to abstain from drinking human blood. On the contrary, I am very happy that you do so. But I do not believe that a more normal preference would lead you into trouble on the other side of the veil. However, I do think it is entirely possible that your chosen lifestyle will benefit you when you do eventually leave this world. So, then, if killing is natural to vampires, all our souls will still be whole? Asked Rosalie. I can be certain. Of course, said Dumbledore, his eyes on Rosalie. This is just theory, but I would guess that any possible damage that you could do to your souls would occur if you were to kill one of your own kind. That, I think, would be potentially dangerous for you. Then my soul must be in tatters, whispered Jasper, his eyes falling to the floor. I fought in the vampire wars. I've killed hundreds of my own kind. Do you regret it? Every day, admitted my brother, his tortured eyes flying up to meet the white-bearded man. I am an empath. Every time I killed someone, I felt their fear, and when you have a memory like mine, it's not something you can ever forget. My dear boy, Dumbledore exclaimed, that is wonderful news. Your soul may very well be whole, after all. I beg your pardon. An empath, you say? Marvelous. That is better than I could have hoped for. What do you mean? Asked Alice, evidently confused like the rest of us at the old headmaster's sudden delight. Regret and guilt, explained Dumbledore, are the only things that can repair a broken soul. Your abilities, young man, which have caused you to experience such emotions, perhaps, make it far more likely that you, beyond any other individual on this earth, have the power to mend a fractured soul. It may very well be that it is once again completely, 100% whole. If not, then you have infinite time to work on it. Jasper's eyes grew wide for a second, before his expression transformed to one of extreme gratitude. Is that why Harry told Voldemort to try for some regret? I asked. It is, replied Dumbledore with a smile. And, what about the vampires I don't regret killing? Asked Jasper suddenly, desperate for any information the old man could give him. Emmett and I destroyed a vampire after he tried to kill Bela. There was no way he would have stopped if we hadn't. So you killed him out of love for your friend? Well, at that time, admitted Emmett, it was more for Edward. We didn't know Bela that well, but we'd seen how happy she made our brother. Love for your brother then? Jasper and Emmett nodded whilst Dumbledore looked on thoughtfully. Make no mistake, love is by far the most potent thing in the universe. It is capable of magic deeper and more powerful than you can imagine. It was love, for example, which saved Harry from the killing curse twice. Love was the reason why he was able to return from death, which, of course, was previously unheard of. Love is far too powerful for any one person to claim to understand. I do not know myself how it would affect you in such a circumstance as the one you have mentioned. All I can tell you is that I have a hunch you are safe, for it is by far the best armor a person can wear, undoubtedly more effective than the hardest physical element. Even vampire skin is no match for it. If Harry's experience has taught me one thing, it is that. We thanked him then, and he smiled at us widely, before returning to his merry singing practice, bobbing his head along to his peculiar song. Tweak tweak, la-da-dee-dum, biggle wiggle, tweak tweak. We all walked back out of the office and made our way down the stairs. I'll be sad to leave this place, thought Alice, who like the rest of us, was quickly growing attached, even though the time we had spent here hadn't yet stretched into 24 hours. So we do have souls, thought Carlyle. There's hope for us, after all. Yes, there was hope. It seemed strange that it could flower so suddenly after such a horrific experience. By all rights, it should have been completely absent. Yet it wasn't, and I didn't think it ever would be again, thanks to Bela. I wound an arm around her shoulders, whilst she wrapped one of hers about my waist as we headed back down the 7th floor corridor towards the grand staircase. So, Edward, sighed Emmett, his face breaking into a smug grin, how does it feel finding out that you were always completely wrong about everything? My eyes narrowed as they shot to my brother, but I couldn't prevent my mouth from breaking suddenly into a massive, joyful smile. I turned my head to Bela, and listened with satisfaction as her heartbeat accelerated. Honestly, Emmett, I laughed, no longer worried for myself or for Bela, it's the best feeling in the world. The end.